Item number 3, House 5445, Sub A.
Thank you. Chairman Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bill 5445, Sub A, by Representative Carson. This bill before the House today is an important bill for our state. It is entitled the Act on Climate and will have significant impact for our citizens for generations to come. The bill is the direct result of compromises and negotiations between all interested parties, including DEM, the environmental groups, and it's supported by National Grid. It is supported by DEM, General Treasurer Seth Magaziner, the Conservation Law Foundation, Save the Bay, Rhode Island Food Policy Council, Acadia Center, Clean Water Action, Green Building Council, the Nature Conservatory, the Environmental Council, the American Lung Association, and many other groups, including the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, Rhode Island Building and Construction Trades Council, SEIU, Teamsters, Ferrazza Laboral, National Education Association of Rhode Island Council of Occupational Safety and Health. This bill requires the state to develop a plan that will make reduction targets for carbon emissions in our state. The requirement of developing the plan is legally binding on the state and the state alone, not individuals or businesses. The authority to draft this plan is within the executive branch through the Office of Executive Climate Change Council, which already exists. All this bill does is update the bill we passed in 2014, 62-2, which included many yes votes of members who are present today, and this plan updates those target dates to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and require a plan to get there. The interim plan must be submitted to the General Assembly by December 31st, 2022, giving this body oversight. The bill will also create jobs and will promote social equity. It will help to ensure the transition of clean energy, helps those who need it the most, such as workers in environmental justice communities. Very simply, this bill requires the state to make a plan of reduction of carbon emissions. It sets target dates for that plan, although target dates of every 10 years, the council will update the plan every 5 years to be sure the targets are met. The bill adds an interim plan for 2022 that will focus on updating the state's greenhouse gas emissions plan. This provides for public input at every stage and creates 2 advisory groups for transparency. The report must be submitted to the General Assembly and Governor in 2022 as to the plan. Multiple layers of agency review and subject to public hearing process and rules and regulations. Importantly, this bill makes certain there will be no onerous requirements on companies or individuals. Although this bill creates a citizen suit provision, a very limited lawsuit may be filed as the interim plan for 2026. No substantiated lawsuits may be filed until 2031. Any individual seeking to sue the state under this act must give the state 60 days notice of their intent to sue. The state has a period of 60 days to take the substantive action. There has been a lot of discussion about this bill over the past few days. Let me tell you what this bill does not do. It does not permit lawsuits against individuals or businesses. It does not eliminate natural gas or oil. It does not require homeowners to replace heating systems. It discourages frivolous lawsuits against the state while holding the state accountable and developing plans to reduce carbon emissions. The bill will provide opportunities for jobs in the green economy, electricians, builders, solar, wind installers are some examples. Most importantly, it will allow us to preserve the beauty of our state, from our coastlines to our green lands for generations to come. It will help maximize family sustainability, sustaining jobs through the creation of good-paying union jobs in apprenticeship programs. This is a good bill. It passed overwhelmingly in the Senate by a vote of 33 to 4. For our children and grandchildren, I move passage.
Thank you. Chairman Bennett moves passage. Seconded by Representative Speakman, Chairman Craven, Representative Caldwell, Representative Henrys, Representative Donovan, Representative Beer, Representative Morales, Representative Batista, Chairman Abney, Leader Blazajewski, Representative Carson, Chairwoman McEntee, Chairwoman Ruggiero, Representative Cortravan, Representative Handy, Representative Agello, Representative Shawcross Smith, Chairwoman Fogarty, Representative Knight, Chairwoman Diaz, Floor Manager Edwards, Representative Kislak, Chairman McNamara, Representative Tanzi, Chairman Hull, Representative Giraldo, Representative Slater, Whip Kazarian, Representative Felix, Representative Alzate, Representative Potter, Representative Barrows, Representative Magor, and Representative Amore. And Representative Rangel-Vassler. Thank you. Leader Blazajewski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Fighting climate change is the challenge of our time. To ensure a safe and healthy future for all of us and our children and grandchildren, we must embrace our shared responsibility to reduce emissions and bring greater accountability, urgency, and equity to governmental action on climate. In 2014, this legislature, on a 62-6 vote, passed this law, with many in this chamber voting in favor, creating the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council, comprised of state agency heads that report directly to the governor. It was created to foster coordination between our state agencies to make sure that they're working together efficiently in coordination to reduce greenhouse gas emissions the most efficient way possible. All this bill does is update the 2014 law. Ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has taught us many hard lessons. To me, one of them is this: our public policy must be guided by facts and science. On February 10, 2020, Trump told supporters at a rally in New Hampshire that COVID-19 would be gone by April. He said the virus would miraculously go away. He predicted that the whole thing would be wrapped up by Easter. I remember that day. He called it a hoax. Since then, the United States has had 30 million cases and nearly 600,000 deaths. The denial of facts and science has real, harsh, and sometimes irreversible consequences. The facts and science of climate change are clear, and the potential consequences are dire. The last 7 years have been the 7 warmest in recorded history. 2020 was tied with 2016 as the warmest year ever. Rising temperatures are causing melting ice caps, rising sea levels, longer and more intense heat waves, longer and more extreme droughts and wildfires, and stronger and more frequent extreme weather events. Rhode Island, Mr. Speaker, is the smallest state and the ocean state with 400 miles of coastline, and it is particularly prone to the dangerous impacts of climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, Rhode Island is warming faster than any of the lower 48 states. It is the fastest warming on the continent United States, Rhode Island. If we do nothing, CRMC projects that up to 10 vertical feet of sea level rise by 2100. That may feel like a long time away, but it's in with many people's lifetimes, and a child born today, it will be in their lifetime. Just to tell you how catastrophic that would be, Rhode Island has $4.5 billion in today's dollars worth of property, less than 5 feet from the high tide mark, all of which would be underwater. And I don't have to emphasize, because you all know, the detrimental health effects would be staggering. Even at a 7-foot sea level rise, over half of Rhode Island's cities and towns will find significant portions of their residential housing stock underwater or prone to frequent extreme flooding events. Many of our children and grandchildren, indeed many of us, would see these changes in their life. But we can still avoid the worst consequences of rising temperatures and rising sea levels if we act now and take leadership. We can achieve this goal. And more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we must achieve this goal. Fortunately, Rhode Island is making progress. We met our 10% emission reduction goal in 2020. So the law we passed in 2014 passed by a 62-6 margin. We met the goal in 2020. We're the only state in the nation with an offshore wind farm. We've been nationally recognized as a leader in energy efficiency and have consistently ranked in the top 5 most efficient states in the country. We are on track right now to have 82% renewable electricity by 2030 through existing planned investments already in existence through offshore wind and renewable energy alone. These investments will bring cheap, clean electricity to our energy consumers, provide good-paying jobs to Rhode Islanders, and reduce our dependence on out-of-state fossil fuels. But ladies and gentlemen, we must continue to do more. I want to highlight 3 important features of the Act on Climate. First, ladies and gentlemen, the bill updates our emissions target in keeping with current science and requires state agencies to work together in coordination to make a plan to reach those goals. Second, the bill increases accountability and transparency by requiring public metrics for monitoring emissions reductions in a robust, open process for public participation and input. Third, the bill requires an equitable and just transition for those most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. It requires a plan that supports workers and the recruiting and training of people underrepresented in the workforce: women, people of color, indigenous people, veterans, formerly incarcerated, people living with disabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, the sooner we make a plan to meet the crisis, the better we can provide for a transition that's best for all Rhode Islanders over the next 30 years. Let's follow the facts and science of climate change and pass this legislation for the sake of Rhode Island's future and its future generations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Leader. Representative Alzate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in strong support of this legislation. Communities like Pawtucket, Central Falls, Providence, Woonsocket, and East Providence will benefit from this legislation. Our communities are cost burdened not only by high cost of rents, but by the high cost of utilities. This legislation will allow public input from my community, which they have never been considered, never or even had a voice. Climate change doesn't just affect coastal communities, it affects all of Rhode Island communities. This legislation will bring us into the 21st century, in line with all of the progress that we make here in the legislation with education, human services, housing, and so forth. But now we finally are making a plan to progress in environment. I will be 63 when this legislation will be implemented. I want to enjoy our beautiful Rhode Island beaches and our summers, which are my favorite. In order to enjoy the ocean state, the ocean state will have to offer in 30 years, all of the beautiful things that our state will have to offer in 30 years. But in order to do that, we have to act now. I urge all of my colleagues to please stand in support of this great legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Bautista, and then Leader Filippi after that.
Thank you, Speaker. I feel kind of short standing at this microphone. I think it's bigger than I am. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill. Before making the 3 brief points that I'd like to make, I'd like to recognize a few folks who are instrumental in making this bill reality. Obviously, Representative Carson, thank you for your leadership. Chairman Bennett, thank you for your leadership. And there are 2 women in particular, I guess appropriately during this Women's History Month, that I would be remiss if I did not mention, and that is Linda Perry, who's been a longtime advocate of environmental issues in South Providence for decades, and Monica Huertas, who is currently the executive director of the People's Authority, also known as the Port Authority in South Providence. Speaker, facts are stubborn things. And this week I've heard a lot of hyperbole and exaggeration about what this bill either does or does not do. And I'd like to state very clearly for my colleagues my unequivocal support, not only for this bill, but for this effort. And the 3 category of facts that I'd like to briefly highlight for my colleagues in support of this bill are the climate facts, the political facts, and lastly, my own personal facts. What are the climate facts? I'm sure today is a nice day and we appreciate the weather, but it hasn't been that long since we've experienced extreme weather, and the fact that the climate has continued to become more extreme every year. It wasn't that long ago that fish that ordinarily swim in the Gulf Coast were found off the coast of Black Island here in Rhode Island. A testament to the extremity of how much the climate is shifting, and if we do not act soon, it will be too late. Similar to the economics, Rhode Island is one of the hardest hit by this issue with our proximity to the ocean and the fact that we have 400 miles of coastline. I cannot underscore the urgency on this issue. We may have the privilege of enjoying the next few years or maybe the next couple of decades, but if we do not deal with this issue, it will deal with us. The political facts. There have been 2 votes on this bill so far. The Senate committee passed it 13-2. And I'm sorry, our committee passed it 13-2. The Senate body passed it 33-4. That's 90% of the people who have faced this bill have voted in favor. If this bill were an assault on our democracy, if it were the end of regulation as we know it, would 90% of our colleagues vote in favor? Who is it that does profit off of this? Who is it that does not support this? The people who profit off of pollution are the people who are going to benefit if we do not do this. And the final thing I would say is a personal fact. I'm not speaking in favor of this bill because some lobbyist is paying me to do so, or because I'm preparing to run for higher office. I'm part of the 11%. The 11% of children who are born with asthma, a rate that is substantially higher in South Providence, where I represent. And as if my life story and the fact that I've endured asthma my entire life, living off of the highway, living close to the port, about a week ago, we had a submarine explode in the port. And if it not were for the heroic effort of the firefighters showing up as soon as they did, the impact of that would have been a lot worse. We do not have the privilege of sitting on our hands and allowing splinter interests to further pollute our planet. And so I thank all of my colleagues for their work on this bill. I thank the leaders who have done so much work to make this a reality, and I urge all of my colleagues to stand in support of this measure.
Thank you, Representative. State your point of order, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I called in 6 amendments on this legislation today, and I was just running around trying to find them. And what I found is the attorney put all 6 amendments on one amendment. So I asked Ledge Council if they could quickly divide them. I don't want to be penalized because an attorney made a mistake and they put all 6 on one. I don't know if we can divide them up.
So, thank you, Deputy Speaker Limo. That's really not a point of order, but it's certainly an issue that we should address. So if you can bring it up,
I'm sorry, point of question.
okay, bring it up to my legal counsel, and between the parliamentarian and the legal counsel, we'll figure out something for you. I expect we'll be here a long night, so.
I kind of figured that too.
Okay, so why don't you bring it up, and we'll see what we can do to make it right for you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Leader Filippi, and then Chairwoman Ruggiero after that. Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the body. I'm going to briefly respond to some of my colleagues' points and then get into it. My counterpart, Leader Blazewski, says we need to follow the facts and science of climate change. Respectfully to the body, I don't believe that the debate tonight is going to be about the facts and science of climate change. I don't think that's going to be in dispute. The dispute tonight is going to be about how do we address it, who's more appropriate to address it, and we respectfully submit that the common theme throughout our debate tonight will be that we, the elected representatives and senators, well, in this body, representatives, are the appropriate individuals to regulate the actions of our neighbors, residents, businesses, and municipalities. And I think when we get into this, we'll see that some of the comments that were made in the opening, specifically that this bill is only binding on the state, simply don't hold water. It's clear that this bill sets up a process where our businesses, municipalities, and individuals will be regulated in a vast area of daily activities, in their personal lives, their business lives, and how our communities plan. So I don't believe that the comment that this is only binding on the state is correct. Maybe the directive that the state agencies must do certain things is binding on the state, but those things that they do will be binding on our individuals, businesses, and municipalities. And I'm sure we'll get into that. To my friend, Representative Alzate, respectfully, I think she said she's going to be 63 when this bill is implemented. I do not believe that you were 54 years old. I refuse to accept that. In 2030 is when we will be mandated to reduce to 45% below 1990 emissions, 9 years from now. I'll continue. To my friend, Representative Batista, about all the tropical fish near Block Island, I've been catching mahi-mahi off Block Island since I was a kid in late August. I'm not denying that climate change exists, but the tropical fish have been around Block Island for as long as I can remember. I'm a spear fisherman. I'm in the water, I can assure you. And that 90% of the Senate voted for this bill. Thankfully, we're the House. And I think sometimes we dig into issues just a little bit more than what some may call the upper chamber, a misnomer in my opinion. And that the people who profit off pollution are the ones who oppose this bill. Respectfully, that type of debate undermines the dignity of this body. We have robust intellectual discussions in here, philosophical discussions. I don't make a dime off the fossil fuel industry. But I cannot accept what this bill does, and that is a massive delegation of our legislative authority, what we've been elected to do here, to make hard decisions. It's a delegation of that to a body of unelected bureaucrats, and I think that is morally wrong, and I think it's a cop-out. This is a generational challenge. It's something that we must confront. It's not something that we can delegate away to the executive branch. Frankly, I don't think we should be delegating much power away to the executive branch, especially the broad scope that this will allow the executive branch to regulate. With that brief intro, Mr. Speaker, I do have an amendment, please.
Just one?
Just one for now, thank you. I move LC 1259/7, please.
Leader Filippi moves amendment. Just 1 minute. I want to make sure I read the right LC number. LC 001259/7. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Newberry and Whip Chippendale.
Thank you very much,
Proceed.
Mr. Speaker. I'll set up my amendment briefly. This bill requires the ECCCC, I'll just call it the Executive Council, save us all a little bit of time. It mandates that they come up with a plan to meet the target emissions, 45% below 1990 by 2030, 80% below 1990 by 2040, net zero by 2050. That plan they must produce, even if that plan is economically ruinous. They do not have discretion but to produce a plan. Period. They can find the plan that's less economically ruinous, but they have to produce it. Now, if you go to page 2, line 33 and 34, it says, if a plan directs an agency to promulgate regulations, then the agency must do so through the administrative process. So the administrative agencies who are charged with carrying out the plan, they don't have any discretion except to adopt regulations, which, respectfully, in order to meet the emission targets, will affect our private lives. I don't think that anybody can say that we can achieve 80% emissions below 1990 without regulating our individual actions, specifically what we do in our homes. The state's Brattle report specifically said you cannot achieve 80% below 1990 emissions without decarbonizing and retrofitting the houses in this state at a cost of $50,000 to $100,000 per house. If I'm mistaken, someone please correct me and explain how we will achieve 80% emissions below 1990 without mandating electric cars and mandating that people change the heating systems in their house. Our own state consultant has said that. So what this amendment does, Mr. Speaker, is it says that the plan, which invariably will regulate our businesses, our individuals, and our municipalities, that plan must be submitted to the General Assembly, and we as the elected representatives will debate that plan, debate the individual recommendations in that plan, and pass laws pursuant to that plan that regulate our people. We do not believe that such broad regulatory power, it's vast what we're giving out to the executive branch, should be used to regulate the actions of our citizens. That's our job. It's our responsibility. We cannot delegate it away. I think it's legally questionable if we can delegate it away, but it's morally reprehensible that we would dare to delegate our responsibility to deal with this generational crisis to the executive branch and unelected bureaucrats, and they will control the actions of our constituents. That's our job. So I respectfully hope that we can have a robust debate on the merits of this amendment, and the merits of this amendment concern who should be wielding this power. Whose duty is it to respond to this generational crisis? Ours or unelected bureaucrats in the executive branch? Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Leader Blazajewski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. This amendment is completely untethered from reality. We do legislation in this body, we pass laws, and then the administration promulgates regulations through a public process called the Administrative Procedures Act. It happens all the time. We passed Rep. Ackerman's bathroom bill the other day. There was a provision in there that said that we allow the administration to promulgate regulations. If there's anything that comes out of that process that we don't like, we're the legislature. We can pass legislation overriding regulations. It happens all the time. But what this does is forget the very recent past. We've just been down this road with the marijuana legislation several years ago. This body tried to do exactly what Leader Phillippe's trying to do here. And the administration sued us, sued the House, sued the Senate, and in order to avoid a judgment against the House, we had to go and unwind that. This is ancient history at this point, but it's coming back to reality here, because that's exactly what happened, and that's exactly what's proposed here. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a process that any state agency has to go through to promulgate regulations. It's a public process. It involves input. There are requirements that the state agencies and administrations have to do. And there's nothing about this legislation that changes that. In fact, as Leader Philippi pointed out, it states that you have to follow the APA and you have to follow the advance notice procedures and rulemaking procedures under the Administrative Procedures Act. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge the body to vote down this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Representative Chippendale. After that, we'll go to Representative Knight. Whip Chippendale, please.
Thank you, Speaker. Certainly, I think when we're talking on this issue, it's slightly different than what my friend, the Majority Leader, pointed out, where we have given or created a system where there's such broad authority to control every aspect of our lives. We've given our authority away. And it was said that certainly throughout the conversations over this weekend, of which there were many about this bill, that, you know, hey, the legislature can come in anytime they want and pass a law to undo something that's terrible. And we just heard that, well, there's going to be public hearings and et cetera, therefore it's got to be good. There were public hearings Friday night. Members of the public were given 1 minute and 15 seconds and then summarily hung up on. Is that the kind of public testimony we're going to have on these issues? It's not very transparent. We are the legislature. If we recognize and acknowledge that we make laws and we can't override anything that comes out of this council, then that's where that authority should rest. Because we are giving the council a very direct mandate to focus on only one thing. Everything else be damned. Right in the legislation. Go straight for your goal. Nothing shall get in your way. We, on the other hand, as legislators, are forced to balance all of the competing interests of the state, whether it's the environment, in addition to the business climate, in addition to the days we come into this building, whatever. We have to balance all of those things. That's our charge as legislators. Now, we don't always do that. We should. But we have much more responsibility, and we must balance all of those things. These folks have one goal, and one goal only. We're giving them that goal. We got to have a goalkeeper. We have to have a gatekeeper. That should be us. We shouldn't be prepared to run in and rescue the state from a mistake made by an unelected council. We should put that check and balance in place prior. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Whip. Representative Knight, and I just want to remind everybody, I'm giving latitude, but we're on the amendment right now. We're on Leader Filippi's amendment, not the bill itself. Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the amendment, and I just want to take a crack at a couple of the arguments that have been put forward in an addendum to Leader Blazejewski's argument. First off, I think it's worth saying that the minority leader mentioned some financial numbers, a study by the Brattle Group that says it's going to cost Rhode Island taxpayers and Rhode Island citizens, residents, just a tremendous ton of money per household to comply with whatever the plan is, whenever we get the plan. Because, as you know, the legislation calls on a group to make a plan which doesn't exist yet. So all those numbers, all those predictions are speculative at best. The worst case scenarios. The plan calls for net zero by 2050. It's 30 years from now. It's not zero, it's net zero, which contemplates some carbon producing activities. Offset, perhaps, I don't know. There will be a plan, and we can evaluate the plan. And frankly, if the plan is out of whack, yeah, we can step in. We can step in and change the enabling legislation. But climate change is happening so fast, what we should not do is say, go ahead and make a plan and then bring it back to us so we can say it's okay. Because you know what's going to happen? It's going to get bogged down. It's going to get put in the hopper in some legislative assembly, and we're going to sit here and go back and forth and have this debate again. And during that time will be lost. So I'm standing in opposition to the amendment for those couple of reasons. But I'll say I agree with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in one respect. The group that is imbued with the authority to make this plan, should we pass this bill, they will have a focus. But the group is made up of a tremendous number of people who all come from different parts of government. We already have DEM and we have CRMC. We have Department of Administration, DOT, Department of Health, Department of Emergency Management, the Commissioner Officer of Energy Resources, the Division of Planning, and the Executive Officer of the Commerce Corporation. They're the ones who are in charge of the plan now under the statute that we passed in 2014. To that, we're going to add the Director of the Infrastructure Bank, the Administrator of the Public Utilities, the carriers, the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority, the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, and the Commerce Corporation. So there's a lot of people who are going to be involved in making this plan, who all come from different aspects of public policy, who all have different concerns. They're all going to come from these agencies, which, by the way, we made so that they could manage some parts of our daily affairs for us. And they're going to come up with a plan. And we'll have the opportunity to keep an eye on them the whole time. We don't need to have them bring it back around so that we can put our stamp of approval on it. They're right next door. If we don't like it, we'll be able to see it. And that, Mr. Speaker, is why I am in opposition to the amendment.
Thank you, Representative. Deputy Speaker Lima and Chairman Casey after her.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. This is actually one of the amendments that I was going to put in. Everyone is concerned with climate change. I know I am, but without this amendment, this bill is a total abrogation of our legislative responsibilities that we were elected to fulfill. It completely removes the people's representatives from any meaningful role in deciding the financial and economic harm that the passage of this act will inflict on the taxpayers of Rhode Island. It sets up a council of high taxpayer-paid governmental higher-ups with absolutely no accountability to the people. In fact, the only accountability they have to the people is that taxpayers are paying their salary. Just think of this as the PUC on steroids. How many times is the PUC going to raise our electric rates and members of the public have gone there pleading not to raise our rates? I don't remember them ever changing their minds. So the public can go there and complain and it will fall on deaf ears. As far as us reacting, they're going to enact something. We know that. They're going to spend money on it, and then we're going to be away for 6 months, and then after the horse has left the barn, we're supposed to come in, react, and fix it. That's ridiculous. It is our responsibility to represent the people and to ensure that things that are going to be affecting their lives so massively that they come to us. The people don't have anyone else but their representatives to speak for them. But we're silencing our own voice without this amendment. As far as the leader mentioned rules and regulations, I have been fighting for legislation for years that when a department takes one of our pieces of legislation and enacts rules and regulations, that number one, we have a record of it, because we don't. We don't even know what departments enacted rules and regulations and which ones didn't. And many times I will tell you that the intent of our legislation, a department enacts rules and regulation contrary to what the legislative intent is. We are taking away from the taxpayers of Rhode Island their voice. We are their voice. We went to their door. We asked them to let us be our voice. And now we're silencing our own voice. It's ridiculous. Please support the amendment. It's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Casey and then Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Speaker. Without objection, I would like to be recorded as present.
So ordered. Thank you. Representative Morgan and then Representative McLaughlin. On the amendment, please.
Oh, okay, thank you. You know, I've been monitoring social media, and representatives in this body have said there's nothing in the bill that says people have to change their houses to electric heat or that they have to buy electric vehicles. This is where it is. Some faceless bureaucrats are going to make regulations, and they are going to force people with a carrot or a stick to put electric heat in their homes and to buy electric vehicles, because that is the only way we can meet the aggressive goals set out in this bill. No, it doesn't say it. We've hidden where the mechanism is that will force your constituents to pay for electric heat conversion. And it's not our numbers that say that would be $50,000 to $100,000 per unit. It's the state's own consultant who says that's what it's going to be. $18 to $38 billion worth of electric heat conversions to meet the aggressive goals that are in this bill. And when we turn this power over to these unelected...
Excuse me. Point of order. I can't see. Chairman.
I understand we're on the amendment right now. This testimony has nothing to do with the amendment.
You are correct.
No, it has. The amendment is about making sure that the power stays in this body, that it is not given to regulators, that it is not given to faceless bureaucrats. So absolutely, my testimony deals with this amendment.
So I'd like you just to focus on the amendment. You can come back, we'll go back to the bill, and you can make your arguments, but focus on Leader Filippi's amendment, please.
I am.
Proceed.
We're trying to keep the power in this body to approve the plan and actually to be in control of how it develops over the decades. Because right now, we are passing this bill without all of the information. ISO New England, which is the group that is responsible for the reliability of our grid, still hasn't completed their report. It's not due out till the end of the year. I don't know why we're in such a rush to pass this, but we don't have all the facts. And once we pass this without having that plan come back to us, there is no way to amend it or change it easily. We are giving our power away. And yes, we are allowing regulations to be promulgated that will force every one of our constituents to spend tens of thousands of dollars converting their homes to electric heat. It took us 4 years to remove one regulation dealing with water heaters. 4 years. That is not an easy process. I just had a constituent call in the last week because the Department of Health has been tossing out a lot of regulations. Public input, they didn't even know this was happening. It just showed up one day, completed, no way to get out of it. There's no public input. And we all know it because we deal with our constituents. If we don't reserve the right for these plans to come back to us, then we are dooming all of our constituents to a regulatory regime that is next to impossible to escape. And yes, that is where, in this bill, we are burdening every one of our constituents, whether they be homeowners or business people or renters, with higher costs for their housing. At the same time, we're complaining about affordable housing. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Representative McLaughlin, and then Representative Newberry after that. On the amendment, please, Representative.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, members of the body. I'd like to reiterate what Representative Morgan said. I stand here today in full support of this amendment. I'm looking and I'm saying we have a responsibility as legislators to basically be there, in reference to every step of the way on climate change, okay? This bill does not represent that, okay? I have been inundated with calls from Cumberland, Lincoln, Pawtucket, okay, for the last 2 days, constituents who were concerned. I probably won't be around in 30 years. Is climate change a reality? I believe so. I don't think any of us in this room are, basically scientists. None of us. Okay, yet there's a commission set forth in this bill. Are they scientists? No. What I do know is about climate change, and I think we all share this, and I'm going to try and stick with the amendment, Speaker, but climate change is multifold, okay? We have the Brazilian rainforest that's being decimated. People say, oh, climate change, these storms. Yeah, okay, that's part of climate change. We have asphalt jungles that we're building all over the world that are taking the soil out of the ground so the water can't be absorbed. That's climate change. 99%
Excuse me, point of order?
What does this have to do with the amendment?
You're right. Representative McLaughlin, I'm going to rule this line of testimony out of order for the amendment. I can call you back on the bill, and you can talk about the bill, but this is strictly on Leader Filippi's amendment regarding the...
I would disagree, Speaker. What I would say, it is germane because it's all part of climate change. And
Respectfully, I've made a ruling. You can appeal the ruling of the chair if that's your desire, but that's the ruling.
Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Newberry, and then Whip Kazarian. It should be.
Working now? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Preliminarily, I just want to say that I think I heard Leader Blazewski and Representative Knight contradict themselves with respect to the amendment. I think I heard Leader Blazewski say that once we delegate authority to the executive branch, which we do a lot, more than I think we should, but we do it a lot, when we try to usurp that function, we get threatened with a lawsuit. I know what he's talking about. And then Representative Knight said, well, if this plan gets too out of control, we can come in, step in, and repeal the enabling legislation. I think Representative Knight's correct on that, but I thought that dichotomy was sort of interesting. But anyway, to get to my main point, this bill has nothing to do with science, and it really has very little to do with climate change, even though that's what it's about. It has to do with power. And I don't want to repeat what other people have said here, but this amendment is more important than the bill. It really doesn't matter what you think about climate change or what you think should be done about it. The question is, who should do the doing? And I hope people really have read this thing through. I'm not going to go over it in every detail, but there's some key passages. First of all, on page 2, lines 11 to 13, it directs the existing council to come up with a plan that meets economy-wide enforceable targets That's the key language. Economy-wide doesn't just mean the government. And enforceable means enforceable. We'll get to that later. Then, later on that same page, as Leader Filippi pointed out, if a plan directs an agency to promulgate regulations, thereby implying they can do that, the agency must do so. Then it goes on, and finally, I haven't even gotten to the issue about enforceability, which would be a subject to another amendment, but it allows anybody right now to file a lawsuit to mandate the state or anyone else, private industry too, and I know it's a bone of contention, we'll talk about that later, to file a lawsuit against any of them and make them comply with the plan. Here's the problem with this. The target here is inflexible. You can measure carbon emissions. You can measure greenhouse gases. The EPA does it. I have data here, which may come up as the subject of another amendment. You can measure this specifically. The plan says you must meet these targets. It doesn't say that meeting the targets makes sense for the rest of society. Maybe by 2050, when it's net zero emissions, there'll be some wondrous new technology that makes all of this moot. Maybe not. Maybe by 2030, when, I forget the percentage, 40 or 35%, maybe the technology will improve. I tend to doubt it. It's improving, but I tend to doubt we'll get there, but we'll see. But we can talk about the APA, and we can talk about regulators, we can talk about all the different people and all their expertise. It doesn't matter. Their plan must meet those targets, and if it does not, it's on the amendment, Representative Hull.
Please, just state your point of order.
You know, Chairman Hull, I'm sorry. Look, Mr. Speaker.
Please, Representative.
This is the second time this has come up. And you know what? How many times when you were Majority Leader did you turn and face the body? I mean, we're in the chamber. This is how we talk. You were Majority Leader and I was Minority Leader. This is how we talk. Is this what we're going to do this? Are we going down this road?
Just a minute. Please, everyone, I understand everybody's passion. Let's just explain. Representative Newberry, you were correct that that's the way when you Majority Leader, they did, but we were in a different forum. We were at the State House, and we're here now. Is it a problem to sit at your desk and address the...
It's actually easier to talk to everybody from here than it is in the chamber.
Well,
is this going to, I'm serious, Mr. Speaker. This is the second time. We're going to keep going down this road. Is this how we're going to do things this year?
I'm trying to keep decorum. I want people to follow the process. If I let you do that, then everyone else can take the microphone and take it from there.
So let them do it. Who cares?
You are correct.
This is outrageous.
So that's my ruling. If you don't like it, Representative Newberry, you can...
Here, I'll talk to you. To get back to the point, as I was saying, the issue is who has the power to do this. These restrictions, these mandates are mandatory. So it doesn't matter how, as Leader Filippi said, how ruinous the plan is. They must put it out there. I don't know what that plan is going to look like. None of us do. But no matter what it looks like, we have no control over it now. As those of you who know me well know, I'm not prone to hyperbole, the last few moments accepted. This truly is the worst bill that I've seen on the floor in 13 years in this chamber. And it's precisely because we are, to reiterate what Deputy Speaker Lima said, what Leader Filippi said, we are giving away the power. I went back and looked at the video when the first version of this was passed in 2014. Chairman Handy was then Chairman Handy was his bill. The debate was about 3-4 minutes. And the vote was 62-6. There wasn't much of a debate. You know why? Because it wasn't mandatory. We weren't giving away our power. We were creating a council, and we were asking them to come up with plans. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of things in this bill I don't like, but I would actually vote for the bill if this amendment passed. We are abdicating our responsibility by giving away the power. It's a cop-out, and it's wrong.
Thank you. Whip Kazarian, and then Representative Place after that.
Whew. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I rise in opposition to this amendment. I've heard a lot of falsehoods about this bill, and I think this might be one of the most outrageous ones. In this bill, this council, all of these department heads, or most of these department heads, already create plans. And they're plans that happen 5 years, 10 years. We don't vote on those plans. All we're asking, and I'm glad, by the way, that Minority Leader Filippi and most of his colleagues agree that climate change is real, because it is, and that is the most scary part about this legislation, is about how real climate change is and how we need to do something about it. All we're asking these department heads to do is come together and put a plan for us to enact as a body, for us to look at as a body. We are not abdicating any responsibility. If anything comes up in these plans that we don't like, we jump in there. We've done this before many times. So nobody's abdicating responsibility. We're just asking for a plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Whip. Representative Place? Then we'll go to Leader Filippi for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this amendment obviously shows that we disagree with the language in the bill. And in my 10 years of being involved in government, including the town council, I hear two lawyers go back and forth on what's in language, because the majority of us aren't lawyers. But they go back and forth on what does the language in the legislation mean. And by default, the one thing I've always done is I fall back to what interpretation is worse for the people that I represent. What interpretation results in the worst deal for my constituents? And if it's true that the legislation does not give them this authority, does not give the ability to promulgate regulations or order departments to promulgate regulations, then it's a no-brainer just to go ahead and codify that into the bill, just so there is no arguments. Because at the end of the day, I trust people in this room, the faces in this room, to make those decisions, because that's representative of this state. What you get in DEM and all these other agencies is not representative of the people in this state. It's our responsibility to take these actions. It's our responsibility to look at the science and act accordingly, not the bureaucracy. We are the ones that take the action. And I think, again, I trust the folks in this room any day over people down in DEM or any other regulatory body, because we've all taken issues from constituents to different agencies in the state. And we look at the regulation, we just sit there and scratch our heads. Why is this? How did you get this interpretation? Where did this interpretation come from? We really want to go ahead and authorize, again, from our standpoint, you can trust two lawyers. Right now, we've got two excellent lawyers right here, two leaders arguing what's in this legislation. I would ask that we do what's best for our constituents and just codify this, just so that it's clear and everybody understands it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Leader Filippi, who I believe it's the, oh no, I was going to say the last light, but it's not, but that's okay. Leader Filippi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll try and keep my comments brief, responding to some of the arguments my colleagues made. The first regulation, which is what's required, is for this Climate Council to pass a plan that comes back for us to enact. I agree with her, that's how things should be, because if we pass my amendment, that's what the law would be. But there is no requirement that this plan come back to us for ratification or for us to enact under the law as proposed. Our amendment would require us to take an enactment action, and that's the right approach. That's basically the shibboleth of the amendment. What we're all debating about is whether this plan should be self-effectuating, where upon passage by the council, it has the force of law, or it is simply a recommendation to us and exercise our lawmaking power to bring those recommendations to bring them forth with legal authority. That's the whole basis of the amendment. I want to go back to something that my brother Christopher Blajewski said, because I think it's really critical about the marijuana lawsuit and how it relates to this amendment. I know we put in a lot of amendments, Mr. Speaker, and with all due respect to my colleague, I think he was speaking on the wrong amendment, because we have another amendment, and that other amendment is forward/.
Well, wait a minute. We have to vote this amendment before you put another.
We're not debating the amendment, but my colleague Christopher Blajewski was arguing on a different amendment, because that other amendment deals with us having to ratify the plan similar to the marijuana regulations that was the subject of the lawsuit. We are not having what's called a legislative veto on the regulations enacted by the plan. That's another amendment we decided not to do because of this argument. The amendment that we are dealing with today is not subject to the legislative veto arguments brought forth by Governor Raimondo, because it says the plan is simply advisory. It doesn't start out as a regulation that then we have to bless in order for it to have the force of law. The regulation we're debating is simply making it advisory. So there's no legislative veto argument. You know, my friend, you know, we need to act now. I think we all do agree we need to act now. But that argument is belied by the fact that the first enforceable plan by the council isn't due until December 2025. So why are we rushing? If we have to rush through this, we don't have time for robust public hearings, we can't get the people in the building, we're cutting people short when they try and testify on certain bills. This fundamentally changes the relationship of our people to their government. It shouldn't be rushed through. And the argument that we have to do something now is just undermined by the plain application of the language that they don't have to produce a plan until 2025. So this amendment makes a lot of sense. It's a question of duty. Are we a body that's going to delegate that duty? And there's one more thing I actually want to respond to, too, was with the comments that we will exercise oversight. If they get out of whack, we'll pass a law. We have to remember that in order for us to nullify anything that this commission does, it has to pass both houses and sustain a veto. That isn't a sufficient check and balance, respectfully, Mr. Speaker. Many of us in this chamber have lamented over the past years about what's going on in the executive branch. Most of you who are going to vote for this bill have come to me at a certain time and said, what's going on with the PUC, with Deloitte, with DCYF, with UHIP, with the lottery? We didn't do anything about that. We had a hearing once a month, screamed and yelled, as we should, and the executive branch just carried on, did what they wanted to do, sent a couple lackeys into our testimony, into our hearings for testimony, yesed us to death, then just carried on as normal. So the notion that we're somehow going to come in and exercise a veto authority through enacting legislation, it doesn't reflect reality that we've all lived in this state.
30 seconds, please.
Thank you, Speaker. To stop this plan or any provision of plan, a bill would have to pass both houses of the General Assembly and then sustain a veto. That's not sufficient when the lives and pocketbooks of our constituents, businesses, and municipalities are being regulated by an unelected group of bureaucrats who Representative Knight named, and I've never seen one of them on a ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Morgan, and then Representative Place.
Thank you, Speaker. We're elected by our constituents to put their best interests here and in state government. They trust us to do that because they know us, because we've gone to their homes, we've talked with them. One of the things that this amendment does is it allows us to continue to work in their best interests, to not slough this off on the bureaucracy, on the unelected. You know, I always laugh every time the PUC raises or allows the electric company to raise the rates, and everybody up here goes, oh my God, that damn PUC, excuse me, PUC. Well, they're only able to do that because we've given them the power and authority to do that. We don't make them come back in front of us. We don't make them justify that to us. So we can point a finger at them and say, it's their fault, it's their fault. It's not the fault of the laws that we're passing, it's their fault. So maybe that's the whole point of putting up this council of bureaucrats who are appointed by one person. So we don't have to take responsibility when our constituents come to us and say, my rent is going up and I won't be able to afford it. I'm having to take out a second mortgage to put in an electric heating system. We cannot allow that to happen. We need these plans and the regulations that fall from them to come back to us to be approved so that we can act in our constituents' best interests. They're depending on us to do that.
Belied by the
fact to us, we can adjust these plans as technology changes, as we get more information about the changing world and the changing climate. If we pass this, it's set in stone. What if technology improves faster? What if it improves slower? It should come back to us because we're the ones who are closest to our constituents. We know them, we know their lives, we know their struggles, and they are depending on us to help them, to make sure that they have enough money in their paycheck to pay all the bills, that they don't have to take out a mortgage to change over their electric system, their heating system. I urge you to pass this amendment, to put us in the driver's seat, to put our constituents first. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Point of order.
It's the decorum of this body. There is a T-shirt that has a sign on it that's placed strategically behind the microphone so that everybody who speaks on the microphone, that sign is viewed. That's inappropriate.
You are correct.
So whomever put that there needs to get it out of here. We need to have an open debate without having an advocacy group from the outside having their advertisement plastered behind our colleagues. Thank you.
You are correct. Point of order is sustained. Representative Place.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This kind of game.
Lied by the
Meaning of the bill is, and if anybody's ever, you know, when you look across the table, your opponent sometimes come up with tells. Some are more disciplined than others. Right now, there's an undisciplined player in this room, from my opinion. Every time I asked, who do you trust more, this body, someone in this room shook their heads no. They don't trust us. They don't trust us to make these decisions. And I would say that's the whole reason why it's written in there. They don't trust us. So I would ask you, why don't they trust you to make these decisions? This is what we're here to do. We should be making these decisions. And I would say to my colleagues, you should work better at getting your poker face straightened out. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other lights on Leader Filippi's amendment. All those in favor of the amendment vote green. All those against the amendment vote red. Clerk, please unlock the machine. Thank you. Just to remind everybody, there are no proxies for amendments. Everyone in the room, please vote. There are 15 in the affirmative, 51 in the negative. The amendment fails. Thank you. Clerk, next. Thank you. Chairwoman Fogarty? In the negative? Thank you. So ordered. Chairwoman Fogarty in the negative, please. Representative Nardone, I'm sorry, Representative Messier? Same request, so ordered, thank you. Representative Nardone, on the bill.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. For the sake of redundancy, I'm not going to go on about the unwielding power that we're going to give this governing council. but I have an amendment here that I'd like to introduce. With this bill, this council would have the power...
Excuse me, just read the LC number of the amendment so we all can follow, and they can put it on the iPads. Thank you.
Okay, it's LC 00125944.
Thank you.
Okay, and with this bill...
Just 1 minute. I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but we have to move it. It has to be seconded before it gets before the body. So just 1 minute, and I'll read it. Thank you. Representative Nardone moves LC 001259/44. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Newberry, Representative Place, Representative Morgan. Thank you. Representative, the floor is yours on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With this bill, this council would have the power to potentially regulate the heat we use, different types of oils that we can use in our home heating systems. And these things that they have the power to do are all going to be comprised with future mandates as well. And what this amendment that I have here, I find it kind of interesting because Rep. Bennett said that it's not going to make anybody have to change their heating systems. Well, I don't see that in the bill. When I read the bill, I don't see where it says you don't have to change your heating system. I see a governing body with unwielding power that has to meet certain mandates. So with that in lieu, there is a possibility that they may have to tell people to change their heating systems. And since Rep. Bennett had said that that's, not possible with this legislation, I would like to introduce legislation that outlines that. And what this amendment would say is it says, neither the council, plans, nor any other state agency regulation passed pursuant to a council plan should have to apply any existing structure, including any heating system. Essentially, it says that they don't have the power to make people change their heating system. So since the bill doesn't say that, and we're all in agreement that they shouldn't have the power to do that, I submit this amendment to say that they cannot do that.
Thank you. Floor Manager Edwards, please state your point of order.
I don't find this amendment to be germane to the bill.
Just a moment. Thank you. The ruling from the parliamentarian is it's non-germane to the bill. Certainly.
It's clearly germane.
Thank you very much. The leader has challenged the ruling of the chair. The ruling of the chair is the amendment is non-germane. All those in favor of upholding the ruling of the chair vote green. Any voting in the negative if you want to overrule the chair. Thank you. Everybody voted? Clerk will lock the machine. 59 in the affirmative, 9 in the negative. The ruling of chair withstands. Thank you. Point of order, Representative Knight. It may have been a mistake. We will check that. She obviously is not here, and there are no proxies for amendments. So, can you, clerk, just check that? Thank you. We will correct that. I appreciate that. We want to make sure we have an accurate record. We're back on the bill. Representative Falella, and then Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I missed the vote on my iPad for the amendment, Leader Filippi's amendment. I wanted to hit nay. Could I be recorded in the
negative?
Negative, please.
So ordered. Thank you. Representative Newberry on the bill, please. So, excuse me, 1 second. I just want to, the clerk said that Representative Kazar's light was not lit. So I just want to get that out there so we have an accurate tally. Thank you, Representative Newberry. And I have the official record. She did not vote, just so everyone knows. But thank you for bringing that. We're all making mistakes, learning as we go, and I appreciate it. Representative Newberry, thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to move an amendment, LC 001259/12.
Just 1 second. Thank you. It's all right. Representative Newberry moves LC 001259/12, seconded by Whip Chippendale. Representative Newberry.
Thank you. This is a very simple amendment, ladies and gentlemen. There's been some discussion, I think, today on the floor. I've seen emails from people. There was one I think was probably sent to all of us. I think it was sent to Representative Kennedy, maybe by his constituent, but it was blind copy to me anyway. Making the case that this bill that we're looking at now only applies to state agencies. I think it very clearly does not apply only to state agencies. I think it applies to everybody for all the reasons I articulated earlier. But to the extent that the intent is to make it apply to only operations of the state government, that's all my amendment does, by adding the language on page 5, line 33. So if we want this plan to address the state and its operations, making this amendment will make it clear that that's the intent. If the intention is to make it apply to private industry in general across the board, then I guess vote down my amendment.
Thank you. Leader Blazajewski, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in opposition to this amendment. That is not what Leader Rep. Newberry's amendment does.
Former Leader
Newberry amendment does. What this amendment does is it goes backwards. We have the 2014 legislation that we passed creating the Executive Council on Coordinating Climate Change, and that had the council look at economy-wide emissions. What this does is it goes back and guts that. It says that the only state-house greenhouse gas emissions related to state government operations are the subject of the amendment. This goes completely backwards, and what's unbelievable is we're trying to address a crisis that is clearly on its way. It's already here, and we have to address. What this amendment does is it guts what we did in 2014. So for that reason, ladies and gentlemen, I urge defeat of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Blazajewski. Representative Morgan, and then Representative Newberry.
Thank you, Speaker. I've heard assurances from my colleagues in this body that nothing about this bill will force them to change their heating system or the kind of car they drive. I think the comments of Leader Blazajewski just put a lie to that, because he wants to make sure that this bill can bring a heavy hammer down on our constituents. It won't just apply to state government. It won't apply to government exclusively. And he's going to make sure that it can go into the wallets and into the homes of our constituents. It's important that this bill be preserved so that it can go into the little guy's wallet, because that's the only way the aggressive goals in this bill can be met. So I don't want to hear anybody, if this amendment is defeated, tell me that it will not result in them having to change out their heating system or the car that they drive. Because Leader Blazajewski just made sure
Representative
that it would
Morgan,
apply.
Please address your comments to the bill or the amendment. That's
So
all.
that if the bill is not amended, it will come down on private individuals, on families. This bill, this amendment would make sure that it stays only with government structures. And if you vote against it, you are saying, in effect, that you're fine with taking money out of your constituents' pocket. I encourage you to vote for your constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Newberry, and then Representative Carson.
Just briefly, the point of this amendment is simply clarity. I'm not really here to debate the point because the bill clearly applies to private sector industry, but there has been a lot of misinformation floating around in the public, and I've heard multiple people say that it doesn't. So at least we know where we stand. However you vote on this amendment, I want it clear that this act, if it passes as is without this amendment, does apply to the private sector. So those who have been out there, not people in this body, by the way, who have been spreading misinformation are called out and identified. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Carson.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to get back to the bill for a minute and really focus on the languages in there.
Well,
if you look
just a minute. I want to just address the amendment. I have no other lights. Oh, actually, I do have one light. I have Leader Filippi, and then I can go to you. We can go back on the bill if you'd like, but I'd like to finish up on the amendment.
Well, it is on the amendment.
Okay, on the amendment, then go right ahead.
Yes, it is. If you look at the enforcement provisions in the bill, they make reference back to the state creating a plan. So that says to me that we don't need to say it another time because we're really holding the state accountable already, if you look at the enforcement provisions.
Thank you. Last light, Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I only had one thing today, but after Lauren Carson's testimony, I have two. Yeah, it's disputable about that enforcement provision, whether a private individual can be sued by another private individual, but when you have the state not bringing the boot down on private individuals, you can have a third party come in and sue the state for not bringing the boot down on private individuals. So that enforcement provision doesn't limit this bill to only being applicable, or the regulations being enacted under this bill only applicable to private citizens. It's not often that I correct Representative Newberry. He had said he's heard from people on the outside that this bill doesn't apply to private citizens, but no in this room. I've heard from people in this room that this bill only applies to government. I heard it in the presentation by the chairman when this bill was introduced a half hour ago that it doesn't apply to private citizens. So I think we need to be a little more frank with the public about what this actually does. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Place. On the amendment, please.
Just, I have a question for either the chairman, the floor manager, the sponsor, if I may. It is germane to the amendment.
The sponsor, Representative Carson, will take the question. Will you yield? She will yield.
All right, so to save time as she's moving to the microphone, on page 6, line 13 in the enforcement provision you were discussing, when the defendant is a government entity, when else would, if this just applies to government, when else would the defendant be a government entity?
Well, again, if you go on to lines 9 and 10, where the plans, where it says, after it opens up that specific part of the bill, it says that the provision of this chapter may be enforced by the means of an action in Superior Court for climate plans required under, and it gives you the language, and then the greenhouse emissions reduction mandate. And if you refer back to that language, in both cases, it makes reference to the state creating the plan.
But, so if, again, again, I'm not a lawyer, but why clarify when the defendant is a government entity? When wouldn't the defendant be a government entity? I don't understand why are we clarifying that, but we don't clarify that it does apply to government only.
I'm sorry, I was just distracted for a minute.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. We're not on this isn't on the amendment.
Representative Place, I have the amendment in front of me. Will you just repeat what you said the last?
My question revolves around the sponsor's statement earlier in the debate is falling on whether or not we acknowledge that this applies to private entities and private government, or it does apply to private entities. And my question in the language is, why do we clarify when a defendant is a government entity if by default the only person who can be a defendant is the government entity? I think again, non-lawyer, I don't know why we clarify that, but we don't clarify that
It's up to the sponsor the way the bill was drafted, but it's really not on the amendment. You can raise that point again later in the debate if you want to, but it's not on the amendment before us. And speaking on the amendment before us, there are no other lights. Clerk will please unlock the machine. I just need to go a little slower, I've been told, because the iPads need to flip over to the voting screen before we vote. So the clerk will unlock the machine, and all those in favor of the amendment vote green. All those in the negative, please vote red. And I will just give it a minute or two so everybody gets to vote. Representative Diaz, will you please vote? The clerk will please lock the machine. There are 13 in the affirmative, 57 in the negative. The amendment fails. Thank you. We are back on the bill. Chairwoman Ruggiero and then Deputy Speaker Lima. Chairwoman Ruggiero.
Thank you, Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, what a great discussion. I mean, there have been some miscommunication and misinformation in this bill, but I stand in strong support, and I want to commend the sponsor and everyone who's worked so hard on this bill. And in 2014, when the Rhode Island Resiliency Act was passed and signed into law, the EC4 for the past 7 years has been writing plans, looking at policy, looking at resiliency, sea level rise, climate change, because it impacts our property values, our infrastructures, and all of our economy. This bill simply continues that work with specific target goals for the state, not business, but goals that state agencies must meet to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Rep. Place raised a good point. Page 6, line 13 of this bill in enforcement. This does hold state agencies accountable, not businesses. This is a conversation I had with Leader Blazejewski. I mean, grammatically, it should probably say, since the defendant is a government entity, but where the defendant is a government entity means it's the government. And it reads that an individual or a group can hold the state accountable. They can file a 60-day notice, which gives the state time to take substantive action, not even a remedy, just take action. And it can go to court. But as we all know, you can't sue the king. So that's why there are no legal fees to be gained. Again, it's not a bill for a business to be held accountable or sued for noncompliance. And I would just add that, at least in my work, many businesses and industries already acknowledge that climate change and climate crisis is real, and they're doing something about it. I mean, just look at the TV ads for auto manufacturers. Look at what Ford and GM are saying. Johnson & Johnson, the National Association of Manufacturers, all of the tech companies. Marketplace competition is going to do way more for the policy issue of climate crisis than any government regulation could ever do. So this bill is for the state of Rhode Island to comply with the greenhouse gas emissions for state agencies, and it's for our duty to protect our children and children's children for the next 30 years. It's great policy, and I would urge you to support it. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Deputy Speaker Lima, please. And then after her, Representative Morgan. Deputy Speaker, I've been told that you have your amendments. Is that correct?
Yeah, we finally got that all straightened out.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Okay. I have an amendment, Mr. Speaker, LC 001-259/45.
Thank you. Deputy Speaker Lima moves LC 001-259/45. Seconded by Representative Constantino, Representative Newberry, and Leader Filippi and Representative McLaughlin. And Representative Morgan as well. And Representative Steve Lima. Any of the seconds? Please hit the second button. If there are any, I don't see any. Representative Lima, proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. There seems to be a lot of confusion and different sides on this bill, but the one thing we know that's factual is we are given to an unelected body the ability to mandate a plan by certain percentages, by certain years, and we do know that the state departments are going to come up with rules and regulations. I don't know, are those rules and regulations supposed to be for themselves or for the homeowners and the car owners, because that's where over 50% of the emissions are from. So just in case, because I do believe in order to achieve those high goals, they're going to have to go after the homeowners and the car owners. So just in case they do have to do that, and it does cost someone, say, $25,000 to change their heating system to electric for a 1,200 square foot home, then I think we need to ensure that our constituents would be able to totally claim that amount of money on their taxes, and it would be fully tax deductible. That's the least we could do for our constituents if we're going to ask them to incur this severe financial burden. I don't know why we're not educating people instead of hitting them over the head with a sledgehammer. That would be a better way to get compliance. But anyway, I think the amendment would make the bill much better.
Thank you, Representative.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Please state your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe this amendment is germane to the bill.
Are you kidding? Come on.
The ruling of the parliamentarian is it's not germane. There's no fiscal note that I'm aware of that included in this.
Well, I wouldn't use that argument. There's no fiscal note. I guess you don't want the taxpayers to get a break, Representative.
Thank you. Representative Morgan and then Leader Filippi, please. We're back on the bill.
Thank you, Speaker. I move an amendment, LC 001-259/2.
Thank you. Representative Morgan moves LC 001-259/2, seconded by Whip Chippendale and Leader Filippi and Representative Nardone as well. Representative Morgan, proceed.
This amendment removes Section 3 of the bill, which is the enforcement section. Former Supreme Court Justice Bob Flanders calls this a legal free-for-all for all that would burden the already burdened judicial system. It extends standing to every person in Rhode Island to sue the state for any entity or organization who decides to put a toehold in our state. This, combined with the fact that we are giving the bureaucracy the right to promulgate any any and all regulations that they want and to put together a plan with incredibly aggressive goals means that any individual can sue our government, and even if it is not fiscally responsible or technologically feasible, they can force the state to borrow as much money as it takes to meet the goals. This would be crushing for our state financially. This is the mechanism by which, even if it's not possible to meet the goals of the plan, the state will pay. Not the state, the people who live in the state will pay. Your constituents will pay. I think having goals, having a plan, is laudable. We should have one. But it needs to be aspirational, because the field of climate change is constantly changing. Technology is changing. The limits of technology are still not plumbed. We need to have the flexibility, not the heavy boot of a suit that would make our state take out loans, take out bonds, same thing as loans, to pay for technology that's going to be obsolete just so we can meet a target date. It's foolish to put these two provisions in this bill: an unaccountable regulatory administrative state with the ability of any person in Rhode Island to sue, and when they sue, the state will then come down to us and say, okay, right? Now we have to have the regulations on our businesses to make them change, on our homeowners to make them change, on the purchasers of equipment like cars to make them change. Without this section, I think the bill is fine. It's aspirational. It gets us moving in the right direction. But it gives us, removing Section 3 gives us the flexibility to react to changing circumstances. You know, I mentioned before that ISO New England,
30 seconds, please.
Who is in charge of the reliability of our grid in New England, they still haven't even issued their report, won't be out until the end of the year. In that report will be their determination about whether we can even reasonably expect to meet the renewable energy goals. Whether it's possible. Of course, we're in such a hurry, we don't want to see that report. Just pass the bill. They'll also have in their report what they think the cost of electricity will be.
Time, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Representative Knight, and then Whip Chippendale.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the amendment. And once again, I'll just point out there's so much speculation in some of the arguments that we hear from the other side. It's important to talk about this enforcement provision because I knew we were going to get there at some point tonight. The enforcement provision is not a broad right of enforcement. It's not Joe Blow can come out of the woodwork, sue the state, and get $1 million. No, it's not. What it is that the Rhode Island Attorney General or an entity organized under the Secretary of State or Rhode Island citizen can come forward and say, you are not meeting the requirements of the statute in that you haven't done X, Y, or Z by the target, right? You haven't made a plan. You haven't, I don't know, something with a plan. You haven't met the mandates. You haven't met the targets. But then things get different. because they can't bring it for money damages. They can't bring the action for that. They can only bring it for an action. It's got some fancy lawyer words, which I won't go into, but just to make the government do its job. How many times have people in this room complained that the executive is not doing their job? That's what this enforcement provision is there for. And guess what? You got to give the government 60 days notice. 60 days. And if they fix it in that time, if they come into substantial compliance, there's no lawsuit. And here's the other thing we haven't talked about at all. The right to enforce through a court action doesn't kick in until years down the road. For each and every one of the new targets, for the 45% by 2030, for the 80% by 2040, for the net zero by 2050, the right of enforcement doesn't kick in until the year after each and every one of those deadlines. So you can't come along and say, I got a problem with the plan. You can only say, I got a problem that you didn't make a plan. You can't come along and say, I wish you'd done a different plan. No, 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 no. If the EC4 or whatever we're going to call them after we add these agencies comes back and says, I did the plan, we did the job we were told to do, then there's no lawsuit. And I will predict, I'll engage in a little tiny bit of speculation that once somebody tries to bring one of these lawsuits, a Superior Court judge is going to look for substantial compliance. They're going to get slapped down, and the next entity will think twice about coming back again. You know why? Because you can get attorney's fees if you lose, or if you win, and the losing party has to pay. This bill is not confusing. There's nothing confusing about it. It is in black and white on a piece of paper. It's in the English language. Each and every one of us and each and every one of our constituents can read it. It is written in plain language. It's not in lawyerese. It revises the targets. It directs the state to make a plan, and it says, guess what? You have to do it because you're going to get sued if you don't. That's it. Everything else, the costs, the mortgages, the second mortgages, the electric cars, all of it, total speculation. Irresponsible speculation, in my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I oppose this amendment.
Thank you, Representative Whip Chippendale, and then Representative Carson.
Thank you, Speaker. The Rhode Island Hammer. We can sue them. So we do, right? Tell you a little story about one of my fire districts. There's a fellow who just did not make it onto the board during the election. And he was mad about that. So what he does now is he sues them every time they're 5 minutes late filing a under OMA, filing their minutes for the day. Or maybe something wasn't on the agenda. He sues them for that. Hundreds of suits from one guy who's pissed off because he didn't win an election. Yes, Representative Knight, you cannot seek compensatory damages. You can only seek injunctive relief. You're correct. But we got to pay your ilk to go in there and argue it. And that is going to cost the state money. Well, we have attorneys on staff at the Attorney General's. Yes, we do. We pay those people. And when their workload explodes because every Tom, Dick, and Harry, forget about the ones with ESQ after their name, can file a lawsuit, who's going to pay for that? Our constituents are. You don't need black and white on a page to understand that. We are a litigious, happy state. And we will bring out the Enviro Karens. They'll go, oh, you're not complying. Boom, you're getting sued. It's going to happen. You know it will. If you're being honest with yourself anyway. So yeah, we can dance around it. We can make excuses about no compensatory damages. Bottom line is, we sue. We will be sued. We will be sued profusely by every group and every individual who thinks the world is being wronged, and it will cost us dearly. Bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you, Whip. Representative Carson, and then we will go to Representative Newberry after that.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm standing here to oppose the amendment. I want to relay a little history to folks. And if we look at the grandparents of environmental legislation, I'm talking about the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act of the 1970s that paved the way for so many additional pieces of environmental legislation, both nationally and federally, have always contained a citizen suit piece in them. This is nothing new. We haven't seen in historically hundreds of frivolous lawsuits against the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act, or really most other laws where there have been the right to sue contained in them. So it's worked really well for the Clean Water Act. It's over 50 years old now, and our waterways are cleaner. So I just wanted to remind people of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Newberry, and then Representative McLaughlin.
So I'm at a loss to understand Representative Knight's argument, because I'm reading the bill in black and white. And the section on page 6, 42-6.2-10 enforcement, starts off, the provisions of this chapter may be enforced by means of an action in the Superior Court seeking either injunctive relief, etc. For, and then it lists two things, climate plans, which is defined in one part of the bill, and then part 2, the greenhouse gas emissions reduction mandate, which is in a different part of the bill. That part of the bill, which starts a page earlier, says, mandatory targets for emissions reduction. It is hereby established that the state shall reduce its statewide greenhouse gas emissions to the targets, et cetera. We've already established from earlier debate that does not just apply to state agencies, it applies to the state, it applies to private industry. So yes, the enforcement section allows for suits to enforce the greenhouse gas emissions reduction mandate, which applies not just to the state, but to private citizens. And in subsection B of the enforcement section, which is lines 11 to 15 on page 6, I'm not going to read the whole thing, you can see it. It says no such action should be commenced, et cetera. And then where the defendant's a government entity, no costs or fees should be awarded, which implies, of course, that the defendant may not be a government entity. So I don't understand the argument at all that the black and white of this says that only the state can be the target of a lawsuit. It precisely says the opposite. And by the way, just in case look, we have two lawyers here. I have a lot of respect for Representative Knight. Maybe we're disagreeing on this, I don't know, but then I look at section, the same page, lines 27 and 28, liberal construction, which is a standard provision. This chapter being necessary for the welfare of the state and its inhabitants shall be liberally construed so as to effectuate its purposes. In other words, if a judge gets this, they're being directed to be expansive in their interpretation. There's nothing wrong with that, but if a judge gets this and there's any debate about the clarity of this language as to whether a private entity can be sued, which way do you think a judge is going to come down? I know which way I would come down. So yes, this does allow for suits against private entities. It absolutely does. You can say that's the right thing, that's fine, but let's not pretend that it doesn't. I don't understand this argument at all.
Thank you, Representative. Representative McLaughlin, and then Representative Filippi after that, please.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'll keep it short and sweet. I will be supporting this amendment. Basically, once again, I want to reiterate, the majority of my calls today, and I'm going to hear someone from the floor manage, someone speak up, but the message was loud and clear. We're sick of you, representatives, okay? We're sick of the government mandating to us, period. So I just wanted to convey that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Leader Filippi, and then Representative Morgan for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting. I look at this enforcement provision of the last lace on the boot that's going to come down on the neck of Rhode Islanders, and I'll explain why. When you have this plan, we take so much discretion away from the Climate Committee. They have to enact a plan to meet these targets. Even if they think it's ruinous for the state, they have to enact a plan. And then the regulatory bodies have to enforce the regulations contained in those plans. They have to adopt them. No discretion to adopt those regulations. And then if someone on the outside thinks that the original plan doesn't go far enough, or the regulations aren't being enforced properly, they can sue and seek an injunction against the executive branch. So now we're taking any discretion the executive branch would have to say, I don't think we can enforce this on the people right now. We're in a depression, let's say. We can't force them to install a $50,000 to $100,000 retrofit on their houses in the Brattle report. The state's own report, we paid thousands of dollars for us at every Rhode Island house. 93% of houses are heated by carbon-based heat systems. It's going to cost $50,000 to $100,000 to retrofit them and install an electric heating system. A bureaucrat in the state government, they exercise discretion all the time. It's just the way things work. We want people to have discretion. So maybe they don't go after an impoverished neighborhood in the middle of a depression. Maybe our friends that Karen Alzate said earlier, who were from East Providence, Pawtucket, Central Falls, Providence, Woonsocket, other areas of this state that are economically challenged, maybe we're in a depression and they can't afford the $50,000 to $100,000 this bill is going to impose on them to upgrade their house to electricity. We're taking away the discretion at that time of the regulators to say, let's just wait a couple of years. Let's not put the boot on the neck of them and make them spend this money. So it closes the loop, Mr. Speaker. It really closes the loop, and it's the most insidious part of this. It makes the wheels of this thing just start turning. There's no bumpers on what they can do, and there's no off-ramps to stop it or slow it down. Why would we take discretion away from the regulators, who everyone here is saying we trust the regulators so much, that's why we're delegating our legislative responsibility to them. Because we trust them, because there are all these department heads that we know. We trust them so much, but we're taking away any discretion they have by allowing anybody off the street to sue them. You know what that's going to lead to, Mr. Speaker?
I know. I get sued all the time.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the litigants in this party wouldn't be suing anyone who violated their fundamental constitutional rights to free speech, equal protection, and due process. They'd only be suing them, Mr. Speaker, because they didn't enforce the heavy boot on the neck of a Rhode Islander who maybe doesn't have the money to spend $50,000 to $100,000 on their house. There's a big difference. And standing, we know what standing is. Standing is where if you injure someone, they can sue you. Happens all the time. And if they don't have standing, they can't sue you. And so here we're saying, even though you may not be directly injured by the regulatory agency that says, you know what, let's not and put the boot down on a poor neighborhood this year. You don't have standing. How is anyone injured by that? How is someone on the east side of Providence injured because the people on the south side of Providence get a little relief from the $50,000 to $100,000 this bill is going to shove down their throat? How are they injured? They're not, but we're saying they are. So lastly, on standing, I'll just say, I think it goes to maybe how poorly this bill is drafted because, as you know, Mr. Speaker, standing is a constitutional duty to determine what it is by the judiciary. It's basically who can come before the court. Courts have taken a restrictive view of standing, and they've jealously guarded their constitutional province to say, what is a case in controversy? Who can come before us? So hopefully the Rhode Island Supreme Court will look at the ridiculous language in this bill and pare it back a little bit, because it needs to be. It's going to lead to a firestorm of frivolous lawsuits.
30 seconds, please.
Maybe it doesn't go far enough. Maybe the plan doesn't go far enough. Maybe it really does go far enough, and someone on the streets thinks it doesn't. There's not even a class provision in here that says everyone's claims are put into one bucket. You can just keep suing and suing and suing and suing and getting all the legal fees. The standing provision is outrageous in this bill, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Leader. Representative Morgan, and then the last light would be Leader Blazajewski.
A phrase stuck with me from earlier in our conversation this afternoon. It was untethered from reality. Representative Knight said, oh no, not everybody can sue. So let me read the bill. The Attorney General, any Rhode Island resident, any Rhode Island corporation, company, organization, nonprofit, Rhode Island legal entity, or organization registered with the Rhode Island Secretary of State may bring suit. Is there anyone else? Is there anyone that can't? No. Everybody can bring a suit under this section. And they will. I'm not a lawyer, but former Justice Flanders said this would be a legal free-for-all. And I also agree with my colleague, Representative Newberry, that this could be brought against individuals as well, because it will be liberally interpreted. So companies, businesses, anybody who decides not to convert. And then I was told, or you were told, that this was wild speculation. No, it isn't. It is from the state's own consultant from 2020, not a long time ago, just last year. Your own consultant, our own consultant, said we can't meet these goals just with weatherization and conservation. That the only way to reach these very aggressive goals would be to go to decarbonized heat. In other words, heat pumps, which not a whole lot of people in Rhode Island already have. In fact, 93% of them don't. Our own consultant said this would cost $50,000 to $100,000 per unit. For those folks of you who have constituents in Providence and some of these areas with triple deckers, every triple decker has 3 family units. If you think that the price of that is not going to go down on your constituents, you're untethered from reality. What makes this bill so devastating and destructive to our state and to your constituents are 2 provisions. One you've already passed on, and that is to make the plans and the regulations come back to us for approval. I hope you will vote to remove this one, which will have a devastating impact upon the people whose best interests you are supposed to be representing. This enforcement section will hurt your constituents. And it's not 19 years from now. If you look at the Speaker's letter that he sent out to us today, it is calling for substantial progress by 2030, which is just 9 years away. I tell you, I have a furnace that's 35 years old. If I had just replaced it, by the way, it runs at about 95% efficiency. If I had replaced that furnace just a few years ago, I'd be expecting it to last for 30 more years. And I think all of your constituents who replaced their gas furnaces in the last couple of years to save money, they're expecting their gas furnace to last 20 years. Or longer, if they take good care of them. This enforcement section has to be taken out of this bill, or it will be destructive.
30 seconds, please.
I urge you to pass the amendment.
Thank you. Last light, please. Leader Blazajewski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in opposition to this amendment, and I just want to comment, there were a lot of falsehoods that were said, but you don't have to believe me. The legislation here is based on law that it's been the law of the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, since 2008. It's been the law of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for 13 years. You want to know how many lawsuits there's been in 13 years? I heard the term firestorm or frivolous litigation, legal free-for-all. How many lawsuits have there been in 13 years? 1, Mr. Speaker. 1. And what was the outcome of that one lawsuit, Mr. Speaker? It was that the court said, yes, Massachusetts, you have to come up with a plan that improves year to year. One lawsuit. So all this hyperbole you're seeing goes back to the phrase I said before, untethered from reality, because that's the truth. All you have to do is look across our border and see that everything that was just said about this provision is not true. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Leader Blaszczewski. Leader Filippi, you have your light lit. I believe you've spoken twice already on this, haven't you?
As the minority leader, I'm not limited in the number of times I can speak on any motion.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the Massachusetts bill here, and I'm just not able to find where its broad standing provision is. I mean, maybe someone could point that out to me. Chapter 298, I just don't see the same standing provision.
Well, I'm sure after the vote you can go speak to Leader Blaszczewski or his legal counsel. I'm sure someone will find it for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other lights. Shall Representative Morgan's amendment prevail? If you're in favor of the amendment, vote green. If you're against the amendment, vote red, please. Clerk will unlock the machine. I will give everybody a minute to switch over to the voting screen. Everyone, please vote. There are 13 in the affirmative, 56 in the negative. Clerk, please lock the machine. The amendment fails. We are back on the bill. Oh, sorry. Please mark my vote in the negative. It will not change the outcome. Thank you. Same thing for Rep. Fogarty. Anybody else? I thought I hit the iPad too, but it's a little slow. Anyone else need to be recorded? We can always come back for that. We are back on the bill. I have Deputy Speaker Lima and then Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I want to add about Massachusetts. They haven't even met their goal yet, and they're putting out a $10 billion bond. But anyway, with that, I will say that we are mandating something in law that we don't know what's going to be necessary to meet those goals. And all I keep hearing is facts and science, facts and science. What's the rush? I have an amendment, and the number is LC 001-259/50.
Just one moment, please. Thank you. Deputy Speaker Lima moves LC 001-259/50 floor amendment. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Constantino and Whip Chippendale and Representative Steve Lima, Representative Nardone, Representative Morgan, and Leader Filippi, as well as Representative Perez. Deputy Speaker Lima.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, again, we're delegating, instead of taking our responsibility and looking at this stuff, to an unelected body to meet certain goals of climate change legislation. And we're doing so without knowing what the consequences of it are going to be. We have no idea what the fiscal cost is going to be. That's why I couldn't give a fiscal cost with the tax deduction. There's no fiscal costs in the bill. So we're mandating this, and we hear, let's listen to the facts and the science. Well, let's do that. What is the rush? This amendment would just delay until we will get the report the state of Rhode Island has been waiting for. It's called the ISO report, and it's coming out in December. Not a long time away. It's the International Organization for Standardization. They work with standards institutes from 150 countries to develop technology patent standards. They're an independent, non-governmental agency. We're waiting for their report. It will be very informational. So why don't we get the facts and the information and the science by just delaying this until that report comes out in December and we can implement this in January? I think we would all feel a lot more comfortable in addressing climate change if we had all the information. I don't think there's any harm in waiting a few months until we get this report. So I move this amendment, Mr. Speaker.
It's already been moved and seconded, so, but thank you.
Oh, okay.
I will note that Representative McLaughlin is also seconded. Leader Blazajewski, on the amendment, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Speaker Lima just mentioned that she wants more information, and that's an exact reason why we should not delay implementation of this law, because the only thing that's going to happen between now and the end of 2022 is that the state is obligated to update its prior greenhouse gas emissions report. So that is a new interim report that's being added here to provide us with more information, to provide the executive and the council with more information. And so in delaying this, you actually will have less input and less information to move forward here. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I urge my colleagues to defeat this amendment and move forward this very important legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Representative Morgan.
Respond?
I'm sorry, yes, I'll let you respond, but I'll let you respond first, then I'll go back to Representative Morgan. She actually yields to you.
Leader, that assessment is totally wrong, because if we delay this until we get this report, then all the percentages of emissions and those dates would then change. So it would give us more time. It would delay it. I totally disagree with that assessment. So I think it would be a good thing to pass this and wait for the professional information. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Morgan, please.
Yeah, thank you, Speaker. I couldn't agree more with Representative Lima. I guess she's Assistant Speaker, is that right?
Deputy Speaker.
Deputy Speaker Lima. She's right. This is really important information for us to get. We shouldn't have even written this bill until we got that information. This organization is in charge of the reliability of our grid. We all saw what happened in Texas with their snowstorm. We get northeasterners up here, easters. They are the ones who will tell us whether we have a robust enough grid, whether technology can actually provide what we have available now will actually be able to provide the renewable energy we need to hit these goals. They'll tell us what it will cost. They'll tell us what the escalation in our electric costs will be. This is important information to have before we start writing plans that are going to affect our constituents. You know, we already have the third highest electric rates in the country. What if this comes back and says, if you go to this idea, it's going to make you number one? Are we going to blame it on the PUC? Probably. We never take the blame on ourselves when we pass laws that hurt our constituents. But it is important to have this information. What if the upgrading of our grid will cost billions of dollars? Does anyone really think that it's not National Grid anymore? I know it's a new company, but that they'll saddle the cost? Of course not. They'll pass it on to our constituents. There goes the cost of their electricity. Their electric bills will go up. Do we know for sure that we can provide all the renewable energy? We don't. That's why this report is important. And I would think that we even shouldn't be passing this bill until we get that report. But as a safety measure, we should at least pass this amendment. It's a good amendment. It protects our constituents in our state. I urge you all to adopt it.
Thank you, Representative. Whip Kazarian, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this amendment. Got me thinking to when I first started in the chamber, actually. It was during a recession. I just graduated from college. And I remember a lot of us talking about how we need to have a plan to fix things. We should have had a plan to fix this. We should have had a plan to fix that. And what this bill is going to do is give us those plans. We're a part-time legislature. We need to rely on the gubernatorial branch to help us, the different department heads, to help us come up with a plan. We've all said that climate change is real, it's happening fast, it's happening now. We need to get a plan together. So that is why I vote against this amendment. That is why I support this bill as it is, because again, it's about getting that plan started, getting it going so that we can start using it to help us combat climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Whip. Representative Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If this was just about a plan that advised us on what to do, I'd agree with everything that my colleagues have said. We should just pass this today, let them get to work. But we have to remember that this plan carries the force of law and commands every single regulatory agency under it to adopt its provisions. So it's not just an aspirational plan or something that's going to come back and advise us. The plan we're asking them to create has the force of law. I don't know why we would make the decision to do that if we don't even know whether the electrical supply can handle what we're telling them to do. I mean, it makes sense to wait. I don't know why we'd be acting when we don't have all the necessary information. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. There are no other lights. Clerk will please unlock the machine. All those in favor of Deputy Speaker Lima's amendment vote green. All those against, please vote red. Would everyone please vote? Clerk will lock the machine. There are 16 in the affirmative, 50 in the negative. The amendment fails. We are back on the bill. Whip Chippendale, please. On the bill.
Thank you, Speaker. It's been tough getting this in on the bill between all of these crazy amendments.
I won't comment on that. I won't comment on that, Whip.
Well, I did set you up. It was put on the tee for you. On the bill, we've heard a lot, obviously, already. I think we're going to hear some more. One of the, I think, overriding themes, and we've heard it throughout, is the cost of electricity, of power. Certainly not something that we're not familiar with as legislators, because we hear from our constituents all the time whenever the rates go up, which they do frequently. And it's interesting because, you know, part of the reason the rates continue to go up is because we as a legislature are mandating on an increasing basis that they purchase more expensive sources of electricity, and naturally that's going to make the rates go up. But, you know, I have the honor of sitting on House Corporations, and we hear a lot of bills about this topic often. And just to point out the dichotomy that exists here, you know, just one sponsor once this year, I mean, there were 3 bills by one person. 2 of them put extremely heavy burdens on, let's just say, National Grid for the sake of the term, on National Grid. That would have cost them ridiculous amounts of money to comply. The 3rd bill was that they cannot ever increase rates beyond this tiny little incremental. It was a total divorce of cause and effect, and I think that is something that we need to remarry. Everything this bill is going to compel regarding electric power is going to go to a cost in the grid. We've had National Grid before us about burying the lines. You know, that's something we talk about a lot because the infrastructure is beat up in Rhode Island. And they've told us, billions and billions of dollars if you want to bury the lines, and plus Rhode Island really is an estate that's kind of set up for it. But they can do it. They can do anything. But who's going to pay for it? The ratepayers are, the same people who call us up and complain all the time. You know, we already have an issue with renewable energy projects being turned down in certain areas because there's no capacity for them to feed into the grid. That's happening actually quite frequently now. And of course, we always get the threats out in my district, which used to be all trees when I started this job. It's now a bunch of solar fields and windmills, but which, by the way, trees are the #1 eliminator of CO2. Go ahead and figure that one out. So we see this all the time where we're going to put in this great idea and we're just simply going to pass it on. And with these solar arrays and these wind, if a municipality dares to balk at the idea, the first threat from that developer is, well, then we'll bring in affordable housing. Well, we need that too. So, okay, why is that a threat? It's about money. They're making money whether they're putting in the fields full of solar arrays or they're putting in, it doesn't matter, they're making the money. In a former life, for half of my former life, 25 years, I was a landlord. Where do you think cost increases go when you're a landlord? We don't just we're not these wonderfully magnanimous people who say, oh, no problem, I'll take care of that massive increase in cost or that massive increase in taxes. We simply do divided by number of tenants equals, boom, here's what your rent will be. If I have to retrofit, well, again, I don't have them anymore, but if I had to retrofit all my units, where's that money going to go or come from? It's going to come out of the pockets of my tenants. So, in some cases, especially now, obviously, who are already struggling to pay their rent. We're not really thinking forward onto who this is going to affect the hardest. And it is those people who are living paycheck to paycheck and struggling every week to keep food on the table. And that can be a huge, huge difference.
30 seconds, please.
Thank you, Speaker. That can be a huge difference for that family, for them to have to pay that extra $50 a month or what have you. Electric cars. Right now, you can buy a brand new car, $17,000, fully appointed. Cheapest electrical car you can get, all electric car you can get into, starts at around $35,000. We're not helping the people who are struggling to afford this. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Whip. Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A parliamentary inquiry and then an amendment, please.
What is your parliamentary inquiry?
Inquiry is where Representative Nardone stood up and introduced an amendment, and that was ruled non-germane. I'm just confirming that does not count as one of his 2 times to speak on the bill.
No, he's speaking on the amendment.
Okay, thank you.
It wasn't on the bill, it was on the amendment.
Okay, thank you very much. I have an amendment then.
And the amendment was introduced, and then it was ruled non-germane.
Okay, but I just want to confirm, I mean, like we all do, we give a little introduction and then we do the amendment. Okay, thank you very much. I move amendment, I won't even do an introduction. LC 001259/3, please.
Certainly, just one moment. 3. Thank you. Leader Filippi moves LC 001259/3. Is that correct, Leader?
It is, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. That is seconded by Representative Newberry, Representative Place, Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Proceed.
Oh, thank you. So this goes back to the enforcement provision. So what this amendment does, it doesn't eliminate the entire enforcement provision like Representative Morgan's amendment did. What this really does is it focuses in on the standing issue we had a long debate on, and just limits standing to the Attorney General. As we know, the Attorney General is responsible for enforcing our laws, and they're more than capable to look at the actions of the executive branch to determine compliance with this statute, the ECCCC, whether they put forward a plan pursuant to what the statute says, and whether then the regulatory agencies properly adopt regulations pursuant to the plan the ECCCC puts forward. Our position is we're very concerned about a floodgate of litigation. We think that our constitutional officer should be able to look at this, determine whether the law is being followed, and we know prosecutorial discretion is sometimes exercised when it's equitable to do so. I won't go through all the scenarios and the hyperbole that I put forward in my last argument on standing and why I think there needs to be some type of discretion. But I think we elect our Attorney General, and we should trust him or her to have that discretion in determining whether to force compliance with the law, particularly during a depression on a neighborhood that might not have the economic ability to pay for those significant upgrades that this will force them to have to pay, especially in their homes. That's what this amendment does. It's simple. It says just the Attorney General can sue, and I respectfully ask for the body's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader Blazajewski, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in opposition to this amendment, which I think we've already fully debated. Again, we heard floodgates of litigation. Massachusetts has a citizen suit provision just like this. And that one case I mentioned before, that one case in 13 years, it was brought by citizens, and it's only been one case. So in 13 years. So I don't agree with this. We shouldn't have Rhode Island citizens have less rights than Massachusetts citizens. And there has been no abuse of it, as we can see, because in 13 years in Massachusetts, there's only been one case. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Leader. There are no other lights on the amendment. Clerk will please unlock the machine. If you're voting in favor of Leader Filippi's amendment, vote green. If you're voting in negative, vote red, please. Representative McLaughlin, please vote. Representative Vella Wilkinson, please vote. Thank you. Thank you. Clerk will please lock the machine. There are 10 in the affirmative, 58 in the negative. The amendment is defeated. We are back on the bill. Representative Place, on the bill, please.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move an amendment, if I may.
Please identify by LC number, Representative.
It is LC 001259/43.
Just one moment, please. Representative Place moves LC 001259/43. Second by Representative Newberry, Representative Nardone, and Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, Representative.
Thank you. Again, we're talking about this enforcement provision. I have concerns going over my previous questions in regards to the language, on, page 6, line 13. There's an implication. Again, I still interpret it where it does. And I think the sponsor even agreed that the language probably could have been tightened up a little bit better, but it hasn't been up to this point. So again, my concern still lies, again, with the liberal construction section of this legislation as well. I'm concerned that this is still opening up our private businesses to lawsuits. And this, again, it's just clarifying. It just says, it only applies to government agencies, and no cause of action against any private or non-governmental entity or individual is authorized by the provisions of this action. Again, just cleaning it up. Some people have faith in our judges to make proper decisions. Sometimes, they don't. So I want to clarify the intent of this body by introducing this amendment to the legislation, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Leader Blazajewski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Again, I feel like we've already debated this as well. The legislation allows for suits only for specific sections. Those sections only have obligations that must be met by the state. and the only thing that can come from a lawsuit is an order that the state comply with its obligations under the statute. So for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I urge defeat of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Reasonable minds can differ sometimes, and that's usually a problem when you have litigation. And if this bill already prevents private litigants from, or excuse me, a private party from being sued, and I think that's been said clearly, that's the intent, we don't read this as closing the door on that. We think there is a possibility that private individual businesses and municipalities can be sued if they're not complying with the regulations put forth pursuant to the ECCCC plan. So what's the harm in passing this just to be sure and say, you know what, let's close the door on that. Let's confirm that no matter what, the suits are only against government officials. Because we've gone through the analysis. We just don't think it's totally clear that this only applies to the state being a defendant. I just don't understand why we'd not have belt and suspenders on this when there's clearly a difference. Rep. Newberry is a very accomplished attorney, and so isn't Leader Blazewski, and they can't agree. And I just don't think we should be passing something out of here where lawyers can have a reasonable disagreement about what the law means, because that's going to end up going to court, and we shouldn't just even allow that possibility. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Leader. I will say that as much as I respect Representative Leader Blazewski, Representative Newberry, there are more than just two accomplished attorneys here in the room. There are several. There are no other lights on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, please vote green. All those against the amendment, please vote red. Please vote. Clerk will lock the machine. 13 in the affirmative, 56 in the negative. The amendment is defeated. We are back on the bill once again. There are no other lights. Oh, almost. It was close. Representative Nardone.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I just want to say, I'm not familiar what's germane and what's ungermane.
No worries.
But I find it hard to believe that we're able to appoint unelected bureaucrats to make laws or regulations that have the power of law, and they're able to implement this in this bill. I do have another amendment that I would like to bring forward. It's LC 00125941. And I believe this...
Thank you. Representative Nardone moves LC 001259/41. Seconded by Representative Place. Representative Nardone, please continue.
Okay, this is on page 2 between lines 20 and 21. I want to insert the following language. No updated plan or the implementation of any regulation should limit the distance of an individual or business entity can operate a motor vehicle or impose taxes or fees on any individual's or business's entity motor vehicle travel. So, and that... Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. That's what I was waiting for.
Okay. I'm sorry, floor manager, we cannot hear you. Can you come to the microphone, please? Thank you.
I've got one more, Rep. Edwards, after this. So.
You can go to the other microphone if you want, or this one, whatever. They're going to clean that for you.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, this amendment is clearly not germane to the bill. Clearly.
The parliamentarian has told me that, so the ruling of the chairs, sorry, Representative Nardone, it's not germane to the bill. Thank you. We're back on the bill. Chairwoman Williams, do you have a light? Your light is lit. Chairwoman Williams, please. And then I'll go back to Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members of this party train. I would like to give thanks to Timmons Roberts, a person I have no idea who he is, but reached out to me to give me some information of which he had been involved with climate change in our state since about 2009 and currently still is. And he gave me a lot of meat and potatoes, gave me more than what this body gave me, and even extended himself when I asked. Unfortunately, I'm not sure. I read this thing, and for the most part, some things I understand and some things I don't. And I'm getting nothing from this body. And I don't want to hear, I get a phone call at the 11th and 3/4 hour, Chair Williams, no, that's not how we do. Priscilla de la Cruz is another individual who reached out to me and gave me some information that I greatly appreciated as well. So kudos to those two individuals, strangers, I must add, that provided me with an insight. But in addition to that information and that insight, they listened and heard what I had to say. And they agreed, and they heard it. Unfortunately, what I had to say fell on deaf ear in this chamber because nobody has offered an amendment with regards to just one of my concerns, and there are several. We talk about equity. This is the greatest challenge of our time. It certainly is. It is the greatest, the most greatest, the greatest, however it fits. And I want this to go on the record that I'm not against this piece of legislation. I am, however, against the same pattern that has been being used. When I speak, I know I confuse some folks because my Spanglish gets people, twisted. And a lot of people don't like to ask questions, what do you mean by that? So they pretend. That's a good thing that happens in this chamber. People pretend. Climate change, it is real. It is as real as we are in this building today. There's no question about that. Rhode Island, we have a problem. Yes, we do. But we need to do it, fix it, address it together. You're not going to write these papers and all this plan conveniently the way you see it, you feel it, you believe it. You're not going to go ahead and use us when you need us and you see. Now, I could present something right here that occurred in front of everybody in this room and nobody paid attention. But that was taken from one of my conversations I had last night. It is so disappointing. It is extremely the norms that goes on up in here. You talk about the pandemic has taught us some serious lessons. Unfortunately, for many of the ones in this room, same old, honey. The lesson is just a temporary situation, but it's business as usual. Fact and science. Oh yeah. We're supposed to be listening to the scientists because they know better than us. Absolutely. They know what's going on. Absolutely. Let me just say this. What I'm going to lay down here can rest assured it's not any speculation. It's no assumption, but documented and experienced facts that I have lived, I have seen, and a lot of you just ignore. It doesn't fit your way of life, your standards, and your plan. In 2009, 2010, 2014, with 2021. This situation has been ongoing and getting worse. Inclusiveness, transparency, conveniently bypassed the community that it affects. But yet and still, you talk about the increase in asthma and other health problems that has affected people that look like me in the neighborhood for which I represent, the district and the city for which I represent. Nobody's talking about that. I heard our property value are going to go down. Property value at the coastline, at the beaches. Some of my people ain't even getting to go to the beaches, never mind owning or living at a beach house.
30 seconds, please.
Let me tell you, I didn't hear that 30 seconds when I sat through this with other people coming up here when they had their first role.
You'll get a second chance, Representative Chairwoman. You'll get a second chance. But I'm trying to apply the rules fairly to everybody. But
No, you didn't. No, you didn't. I got 30 seconds.
Yes.
I'll come back. And when I come back, I'm going to let you know the rest of what I didn't tell you last night. How about that?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Representative Filippi. Leader Filippi, sorry.
It's okay, Mr. Speaker. Titles are sometimes a dime a dozen in this room, so I take no offense. Sorry. As you know, Mr. Speaker, I've grown up a family with a cattle farm, and we could build houses, we could do a development, but we love the land and we love raising cattle. I wouldn't give it up for anything in the world. It brings me more happiness than most things that I do. And if I didn't have the ability to engage in that profession, I would have no choice but to turn beautiful green fields and forest into concrete, wood, and brick. And I think that would be really sad, not just for myself and my family, but for this state and our community, because kids come, they play with our animals, maybe they ride a horse for the first time in their life and fall in love with nature. And the way we're able to sustain that lifestyle, that fading culture, is because we are able to market our product and people eat meat. Now, when you read the scope of this legislation, Mr. Speaker, it's undeniable that this committee will have the ability to regulate anything that creates greenhouse emissions. Anything. Now, I just Googled climate change, plant-based diet, right? Hundreds of thousands of articles that say, in order to save the planet, we have to move to a plant-based diet, and that cows are one of the most polluting things out there. All the methane that cows excrete is killing our planet. I think it's ridiculous because the alternative to people like myself raising cattle is concrete and brick. So I move an amendment, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure debate's going to be shut down in about 30 seconds from Whip Edwards, and we're not going to take a vote on this because we don't want to have an open debate on the issues, but I move LC 00125/9. Someone please second this.
Leader Filippi moves LC 00125/9/9, seconded by Representative Newberry, Representative Place, Representative Nardone, Representative Morgan, and Whip Chippendale, Representative Place as well, and Representative Price.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have a fundamental right as humans to consume what we want, to sell food to each other. This committee and any of the regulations promulgated under it cannot regulate the food we have available for sale at retail. It's improper. We know that there are people out there who think that agriculture is destroying our climate, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Do it. Google plant-based diet, global warming. Hundreds of thousands of articles from purported experts who say that my lifestyle and the choices I've made to preserve land and grow animals is destroying this earth, and that the only way to save the climate is to move to a plant-based diet. It's ridiculous. Now, would this committee actually try and regulate the production of meat or the keeping of animals? Maybe. I hope not, but we're giving them the power to do it. And these are fundamental rights that we have as humans to choose what we eat. And there's no way we can delegate that authority to a non-legislative entity. So I appreciate Floor Manager Edwards not objecting to this, and I appreciate the body's consideration. Because if we are ever to control the food supply, if the government's going to go that far to play with our food supply, it has to come out of this body. It cannot come from the executive branch. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
There it is.
State your point of order, please.
Mr. Speaker, this, like the tin hats, is completely and totally not germane to the bill.
Thank you. Let me make a ruling first, and then you can object. Parliamentarian says there's nothing in the bill that regulates food supply, and this amendment is not germane to the bill. But so that's the ruling of the chair.
I understand the ruling of the chair, Mr. Speaker, but the plan regulate. We're saying what this plan can and cannot regulate. We're saying what the regulations can and cannot regulate. It's clearly germane, and we just don't want to have this discussion.
Gentlemen, ho. The ruling of the chair is it's non-germane. This non-debatable motion. Respectfully, if you want to disagree, you can appeal the ruling to the chair, to the body.
We're not abusing it, but on this one, I'm appealing it. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you very much. The ruling of the chair is appealed. If you agree with the ruling of the chair that this is non-germane, please vote green. If you agree that this is germane and you disagree with the ruling of the chair, vote red. Thank you. Clerk, please unlock the machine. Please vote. There are 56 in the affirmative and 9 in the negative. The ruling of chair stands. We are back on the bill, please. Representative Caldwell on the bill.
Thank you, Speaker. This is my first time at this new setup.
here. I rise today in strong support of this bill, Representative Carson's Act on Climate. Climate change is one of the biggest challenges that we're facing today. And when I go door to door in my district, part of it, which is a waterfront community, people are united that they want a bold agenda for us to act on climate to protect us here in the Ocean State from climate change. In East Greenwich, we are having a huge environmental debate right now, and people, regardless of political party, age, any sort of affiliation, are united in speaking in one voice, that they want us to enact a bold agenda in the face of this crisis that we are facing of climate change. So I am enthusiastically and gratefully voting for this bill today, and I really urge all of my colleagues to join me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative McLaughlin, please. And then Representative Place.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, representatives of the body, I would basically, I'm going to be voting against this bill. For the last 2 days, my constituents of Cumberland have spoken, and they said, how dare you? Okay. They have heard a lot of things about the mandates and what it represents. They're sick and tired of government intervening in their lives, okay? And I got the message loud and clear. But I don't know what's going to happen here today, but I will tell you this. I look at climate change, the amendment that was just ruled ungermane, I believe it pertained to meat, and I'm looking methane gas. Okay, they want to do away with our cows, for Christ's sakes. What's next? I'm looking, I'm saying, how far is government intervention going to go in the everyday of our lives? I look at our automobiles. Our gas stations are saying, oh, I'm sorry, your 02 sensor just came on. Guess what? It's going to cost you $500. Well, a lot of people can't afford that $500 to drive their cars. I don't know when the hell everybody's going to get it. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Place, and then Chairwoman Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may, I'd like to move an amendment.
You may. Would you please give us the LC number?
The LC is 001259/42, please.
Thank you. Representative Place moves LC 001259/42. Seconded by Whip Chippendale, Representative Morgan, Representative Newberry. Proceed, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment comes out of conversations I've had with some of my local planning and zoning officials and members of those boards in my community. They're concerned that we do agree that this new powers that we're issuing to the east, I'm not going to get into it, I can't do it as well as Blake, we'll be able to promulgate down to other governmental entities in the state. And in essence, all this does is says that no regulation that this body promulgates will be able to impact municipal zoning and planning, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. On the amendment, are there any lights on the amendment? Leader Blazajewski on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment isn't germane. I ask for a ruling of the chair.
The same ruling, there's nothing in the bill regulating zoning or planning, so the chair rules this non-germane. Thank you. We're back on the bill. Representative Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to move an amendment that I believe is germane. It's LC 1259/15.
Representative Newberry moves an amendment LC 001259/15. Seconded by Representative Place, Representative Morgan, Whip Chippendale. Proceed, Representative Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is actually a very simple amendment. I'm not going to rehash the discussion we had earlier involving who has standing to sue, whether they can only sue the state or a private entity, et cetera. I think we can all agree there's a basis to bring a lawsuit here to enforce the statute. Now, part of that basis is to enforce whether or not a plan exists, but I think arguably it's also to enforce whether or not the plan complies with the mandates. And it's very conceivable you could have an executive branch that wants to slow play enforcement, wants to drag it out, does not want to actually comply with the mandate. So what happens when a lawsuit goes to court? The enforcement provision allows for a Superior Court judge to issue injunctive relief, mandamus, et cetera. I know not everyone here is a lawyer, but I think most people know that basically gives the trial judge immense powers. And I'll give you an analogy from a completely separate area, not climate change related, but it's a real analogy. There's a bill before this body, and I think it's been in for a couple of years, about making a right to education a constitutional right. There have been cases in federal courts in other parts of the country over the years in which judges have found various constitutional rights to education. And in fact, there was one relatively famous situation where a federal judge in Kansas City, Missouri, effectively ran the school district for a number of years. And if I recall the details, and I may have this a little fuzzy, it goes back to the 90s, the judge actually found himself having the ability to compel the school district to raise taxes and so on. I don't like the enforcement provision at all, but that ship has apparently sailed with those amendments. But one thing I want to make sure is that if this chapter ends up in court, I do not want one Superior Court judge to have sole jurisdiction. For one thing, most of our Superior Court judges, however good they are as judges, are not experts in a lot of the areas that this bill tries to address. But for another thing, giving that much power potentially to one person is not a good idea. So if a lawsuit is brought under this chapter, I'd like to have it heard by a panel of 5 Superior Court judges appointed by the presiding justice of the Superior Court. I think it's precautionary. I think it makes sense. It'll give a broader perspective on something of, as we've been hearing tonight, is of immense importance to the states. That's all my amendment does.
Thank you. On the amendment, Leader Blazajewski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in opposition to this amendment. There is zero precedent for this anywhere to have a panel of 5 Superior Court justices at the Superior Court level. But what there is a right of appeal in Rhode Island to a 5-member panel of the Rhode Island Supreme Court. So it isn't that there's one judge that has final rulings on everything. You have a right to appeal to the Rhode Island Supreme Court, and you get your panel review at that point. So without any precedent for this whatsoever, and with a panel review baked into our system, I urge defeat of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Newberry.
I'm sorry, I wasn't planning to stand up, but my friend, Leader Blazajewski, knows full well. They're right, there's no precedent. That doesn't mean anything. We can set the precedent for this particular important issue. But putting that aside, and every lawyer in here knows what I'm talking about, there's a completely different procedure in a trial court than an appeals court. Something like this, injunctive relief, et cetera, calls for factual findings, hearings, testimony. There's often an abuse of discretion standard applied in the lower court. The lower court judge has immense power, hence the reason for my concern. All the Supreme Court can do is review certain things that meet the standards for review and under certain appellate standards. It is not at all the same thing to say that 5 judges in the Supreme Court is the same as 5 justices in the Superior Court. They're totally different, totally different. That is why I put the provision in, and that's why I think we should pass it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any lights on the amendment? There are no lights on the amendment. Clerk will unlock the machine. If you vote in favor of Representative Newberry's amendment, vote green. If you vote against it, vote red. Everybody please vote. There are 13 in the affirmative, 52 in the negative. The amendment fails. We are back on the bill. Chairwoman Williams, I'm sorry, just a moment, we're having a problem with the voting. Go ahead. You want to vote in the negative? Representative Donovan in the negative. Thank you. Chairwoman Williams.
How much time I got right now? So I can make sure I manage that well?
About 5 minutes.
Let me just say this. The pattern, as I alluded to earlier, is still being used now. You talk about on page 3, starting at line 4, but realistically going to line 8, the plan shall identify. The plan shall provide. Let me tell you something. For years and years on top of years, this body has been making plans and studies to identify. We don't need to do that anymore, okay? You talk about jobs and good paying jobs that's gonna happen. We're not gonna be included in there. Identify and come up with another excuse of why we don't qualify, okay? You talk about falsehoods, you talk about trust. There is no trust, and rightfully so. See me when you need me. See us when you need us, and use us appropriately for your own benefit. Climate change is real. The meetings are being held in my district. Oh, they needed a space, but no neighbors have been informed of this. But we have been meeting and talking about this for decades. Now we're going to do the master plan. Again, we're not included in any of it. At the end of the day, I'm not going to go along just to get along. I'm here representing the people that's been oppressed in the state of Rhode Island. And far too often, they continue to be used and oppressed. And every now and then you pull one or two for the show. And I say that if you expect me to vote on this bill the way it's written, without making sure that it's mandated that we will be part of the plan, not just be identified in the plan, I'm not. In addition to the many questions that I have, that I will get from those two people that reached out to me. I'm certain of that. But today is not the day that I'm going to vote in favor. But the message last night is, because I'm leadership, I'm supposed to. And I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Majority Leader, if you feel that I'm not living up to my position in the leadership, you can do what you know best to do about it. Because it's not going to change who I am and why I'm here. Because it's about the people first. My people. The people of the state of Rhode Island for which this is going to affect in a good way or a positive way. Children's. I'm one of those generations, from my grandfather to my father to me. And we're still in the struggling. So I'm gonna tell you, it's a real situation. You either mandate that we are part of it, not just being identified in it, or I tell you what, you can make those amendments, call up and have it delivered. If not, you know where I stand. In English and Spanish.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Representative Place, and then Whip Chippendale.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce another amendment, please.
Certainly. The LC number, please, Representative.
LC 001259/13.
Thank you. Representative Place moves LC 001259/13. That is seconded by Whip Chippendale and Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll call everybody's attention to page 2 of the bill. Let's see, my eyes are going bad. 33. If a plan directs an agency to promulgate regulations, then the agency must do so by either issuing an advance notice or proposed rulemaking. I'd like to delete the do so and insert commence the rulemaking process, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we are following the Administrative Procedures Act as we promulgate these regulations.
Okay, well, thank you. Leader Filippi.
I'll demur to the leader. Oh, wait, my light's off.
Okay. Leader Blazajewski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in opposition to this amendment. As you just heard, the purpose of this amendment is to have the work being done by the Economic Climate Change Coordinating Council to fall under the APA. It does, because all administrative agencies fall under the APA unless there's an exclusion. There's no exclusion for this entity. But even further, this legislation specifically references the provisions of the APA, which are 42-35-2.5. And if you move on to page 3, line 2, 42-35-2.7, which are the mannerism by which notice is provided for public input and analysis for proposed rulemaking. So, Mr. Speaker, for that reason, I urge defeat of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank Representative Place for this intelligent amendment, and I thank Leader Blazajewski for supporting the arguments for it. And the reason that I believe Leader Blazajewski supported the arguments for it is that core to the APA is acquiring information and the regulatory body exercising its discretion as to whether to adopt or a regulation or not. That first line on page 2, line 33, the must do so, which is must adopt a regulation as put forth in the plan, that essentially has usurped any discretion that the underlying regulatory agency has to determine whether the regulation makes sense or not. It makes them look at maybe vulnerable populations. Traditionally, they would be able to and say, this doesn't make sense for certain vulnerable populations. This doesn't make sense from economic perspective. Or maybe the rule just plain doesn't make sense. And the problem, I think what this amendment does, it once again exposes the overlying problems with this bill, is that we just take away discretion at every point along the way. We tell the ECCCC, you have to create a plan, and they have no discretion to say there's no economically viable way to create this plan. We have to produce it, even if we hate it, even if it costs Rhode Islanders billions and billions of dollars and impoverishes them. Now, I don't know at the time that the circumstances would impoverish the state, but I don't want to take that discretion away from anyone in the rulemaking process to say this is an unreasonable regulation. So I think the underlying administrative agencies who are professionals, who have staffs, who are appointed, who have a fiduciary duty to look out for the citizens of Rhode Island should be able to exercise their APA rulemaking authority, which involves them doing economic analyses, looking at the effect of the regulation. The way this bill is drafted, it usurps that traditional APA rulemaking authority and has a theater APA proceeding. You must adopt the rule. No choice, you must adopt the rule, but go ahead and have your little APA proceeding, put out notice, take some public testimony, but we usurp any discretion that those administrative agencies have to say whether the regulation makes sense or not. So there's got to be a point where there's an off-ramp, Mr. Speaker. There's got to be a point where we say, we're not going to institute this plan. The ECCCC doesn't have an off-ramp. They have to produce a plan, even if they hate it. And the way the bill's drafted, the regulatory agency who is charged with enforcing that plan, adopting regulation, has no way to say, we can't adopt this regulation we have to adopt this regulation, even though we don't want it, even though we think it is harmful to Rhode Islanders. So this produces some type of off-ramp, some type of discretion to say that this is not in Rhode Islanders' interests. We're going to take a pause. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Leader Filippi. There are no other lights on the amendment. LC 001259/13 by Representative Nardone or Place? Who proposed? Representative Place. There are no lights. If you agree with the amendment, vote red. If you don't, please vote, excuse me, if you agree with the amendment, vote green. If you don't agree with it, vote red. Clerk, please unlock the machine. All those representatives in the chamber, please vote. Thank you. Representative Donovan is in the negative. Am I correct, Representative? And Rep Diaz also, there we go. Thank you very much. Clerk, please lock the machine. 13 in the affirmative, 55 in the negative. The amendment fails. Thank you. We are back on the act again. Representative Morgan on the act, and then Representative Tanzi on the act.
Thank you, Speaker. I was struck by my friend Representative McLaughlin's words. He just said that our constituents want the least government interference in their lives possible. They want to get up in the morning, they want to go to work, they want to make their money, they want to spend their money on the things that they think are important. And they don't want government interfering with that. So a lot of the amendments that I had written up are about that. It's about putting guardrails on government, guardrails on the regulations and the long hand of government into our lives. We've heard the stories. We've had constituents talk to us about regulators or auditors or inspectors showing up at their business if they have the audacity to complain about something in government that they don't like. It happens. And as a punishment, government shows up at their door. So I am proposing Amendment LC 001259-29.
Just a moment, please.
This amendment.
Just 1 minute. I got to get it in play, and it has to be second, and then you can speak on it. Representative Morgan moves LC 001259/29. It is seconded by Representative Nardone, Whip Chippendale, Representative McLaughlin. You seconded it? Yes, he seconded it, and Representative Price as well, and Leader Filippi. Proceed, Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Speaker. This amendment is a guardrail for government. And it simply says that no state or municipal government entity can impose higher taxes or fees on an individual or an entity, cannot take adverse regulatory action upon any individual or entity for failing to convert to electric heat or electric vehicles. In other words, when that individual or that business thinks they can afford it, they'll do it if it's the right thing to do. But they can't be taxed or audited or inspected to force them to do something that they don't think is in their best interest or that they can't afford to do.
Yes, is that a point of order?
No, it's not. The amendment's not shown up on
Okay, just a moment, we'll refresh.
This bill needs a lot of guardrails.
I just want to make sure, Representative, just a minute, everybody can look at your amendment. I want to give it proper consideration.
Regulations.
/29. I will read it again. It's LC 00125-9/29. 29 by Representative Morgan.
Regulators can raise the fees we pay on our registration, our inspections. They can raise the fees on the tolls that we pay going across the Newport Bridge. They can do anything. And it needs guardrails. The ultimate guardrail was the First Amendment that our caucus proposed, having it come back here to the General Assembly. But at the end of the day, if our constituents, or if the little company, little store in our neighborhood can't afford to convert to electric vehicle, we should not be empowering state government or municipal government in taking adverse action against them, either through higher taxes or fees or inspections. Just makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Floor Manager Edwards, please state your point of order. Just a minute.
This bill on our constituents.
Okay. Thank you. The ruling of the chair after consulting with the parliamentarian is it is non-germane. There is nothing in the bill that, mandating conversion to heat or electric cars, and that's the ruling of the chair, Representative. We are back on the bill. Representative Tanzi first, and then Representative McEntee on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Meeting these goals through a combination of energy efficiency investments is what we're going to do. These are not the highly imaginative ones that we've heard from those offering amendments tonight, those highly speculative ones, but they're the tried and true ones that we've used so far in our state, in our region, and in our country. They're things like renewables, such as rooftop solar, whether that be a ground mount or rooftop solar, putting these on brownfields. These can be achieved through regional efforts in purchasing biomass, wind and small hydro procurements, and offshore wind projects being pursued by a majority of New England and the Mid-Atlantic states. And then, after we go through all of those, should we exhaust all of those options that we currently know, we can purchase renewable energy credits from the region. It's being done right now. It's been disheartening to sit through 3 hours of some of the most imaginative solutions that have no basis in the proposed law. Frankly, for people who have so little faith in our government, I'm shocked that anyone is able to drive on our roads or drink our water. And at the end of the day, we cannot allow the highly speculative and incredibly creative worst-case scenarios that have been spoken about so far, things like banning cattle farms, prevent us from acting any longer. We should channel all of that creativity to make the change that we desperately need as the ocean state. I highly support this bill. I'm really disheartened to hear all of the misinformation that I've been hearing, and hope that we'll pass this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative McEntee, and then Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I'd like you to mark me in the negative on the last amendment, but then I would like to
So
say
ordered.
something about the bill. I represent Narragansett and South Kingstown. I have been a town councilwoman in South Kingstown from 2008 to 2015, and since then I've been in this house. We have done, in my capacity as a politician, I have spent so many hours fighting climate change. Come down to Narragansett, take a look at the beach. We're looking for money all the time to put more sand on that beach. I implore all of you to come and look at what's going on at Narrow River right now. The mouth of the river is unrecognizable. It's almost closed. I'm in touch with CRMC. I'm in touch with all the neighborhood groups that are worried about the river and the health of the river. We really have to take this so seriously. And I'm sitting back here listening to one complaint after the other about enforcement. We need to enforce this. We can't go on like this. And Mr. Speaker, you'll remember Grover Fugate, most of you remember. He came up with this big flood plan. And he said it was the 100-year plan when we're going to lose half of our waterfront properties. Well, last I spoke to him, it's now the 50-year plan. So, I mean, every day it gets worse. When I first started in South Kingstown, it was Matunic. The ocean mist was going into the drink. We had to put up a wall to stop the erosion of the beach, to save the infrastructure under the road. We did it for years. We finally got the wall up. We still need more wall. It boggles my mind. It's time to do this bill. It's time to take serious action. We owe it to our children, we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to this planet. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Place. And then Whip Chippendale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may, I'd like to introduce another amendment, please.
Sorry, Representative.
Another amendment, Mr. Speaker, if I may.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce LC 001-25914, please.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Place moves LC 001259/14. Seconded by Representative Nardone, Whip Chippendale, Representative Morgan. Proceed, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we've made the decision that we don't want the regulations promulgated by this or mandated by this board to go through the full vetting of the Administrative Procedures Act. That's the decision we've made. I'm asking that we at least mandate that the plans that this agency develop are moved through the full Administrative Procedures Act, Mr. Speaker. And that is what this amendment would do by adding language let's see, on page 3, lines 19 and 20, insert the following language. The development of the plan shall be subject to the requirements of Chapter 35 of Title 42.
Thank you. On the amendment, Leader Blazajewski, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Again, we've already debated this. The Economic Climate Change Coordinating Council is subject to the APA. There are specific APA references. I mentioned it on a prior amendment. I can refer back to them if anyone wishes, but there are specific references to this applying to APA, so I think Place misheard me before. This body is subject to APA. It's already the law, and so I urge the defeat of this amendment. There are specific APA, Administrative Procedure Act references in the law. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the leader yield, please?
I'm sure he will. Leader Blazajewski, will you yield to Leader Filippi? He will.
Yes.
I will take you up on your invitation, Leader. Where specifically are the APA requirements for the ECCCC?
So they are already in state law. So under the Administrative Procedures Act, Section 42-35-1, there's no exception for this body, the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council. So it's subject to the APA. And then in the bill, I will point you to this specific section. So there's, if you look at page 2, line 34, it specifically references the rulemaking procedures that are required by the APA in sections 42-35-2.5 and 42-35-2.7, which is a public process for input and promulgation of regulations. Thank you.
Respectfully, Leader, that applies to the underlying agency, not the ECCCC. The reference in the bill to the Administrative Procedures Act isn't for the ECCCC. It's for the underlying state agencies that are forced to adopt the regulations in the ECCCC plan.
Leader, I don't read it that way. And additionally, even if that were true, this is an executive agency that works through the executive body, and there's no exception that applies to the EC4. So
okay, so just clear for the record, your interpretation of the existing Administrative Procedures Act encompasses the ECCCC. Even though it's not subject to the ECC, under my interpretation in this law, it's immaterial.
That's correct.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my opinion is let's belt and suspenders this. I think there's an error in drafting in that the ECCCC isn't subject in the bill to the Administrative Procedures Act, whereas all the underlying agencies are. I just want to be careful and make sure that any plan adopted by the ECCCC is subject to all the public notice, hearing requirements, the body of law that makes sure that any rulemaking has the proper public vetting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. On the amendment, Representative Knight on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the amendment. You know, sometimes you got to stand up. In 4235 1.1, which is the applicability of the APA, it says that the chapter applies to all agency proceedings, unless exempted. So there's nothing in the bill that exempts, that affirmatively exempts. In fact, I think the only thing that's exempted is the Board of Elections, which is that's a topic for another day. So I think Leader Bledsoe-Juski has it right, and I urge you to vote no.
Thank you, Representative. There are no other lights on the amendment. Clerk will please unlock the machine. All those in favor of the amendment vote green. All those against, please vote red. Has everyone voted? Please vote if you're in the chamber. There are 11 in the affirmative, 55 in the negative. Clerk, please lock the machine. The amendment is defeated. Thank you. We are back on the bill. And I would ask for a pause for a moment. I want to be at ease on the bill. We have a problem, not a big problem, but a problem because most of you will notice your iPads are running out of power. And mine's down to 12%. So we have one bill that we actually have to do for the town of Westerly, which is has come over from the Senate. I believe there is consent from the majority leader for an IC. It's a Westerly bond bill. I want to do that bill now, And I don't know, I'm going to stand at ease and maybe ask Leader Filippi and Leader Blazajewski to talk about how many more amendments there are. If there's one or two, then we'll try to finish tonight, and if not, we can stop and continue on Thursday, and we can move the calendar as well. So I'm going to move to Chairman Hull, because this Westerly bill is important. I want to do it while we have time, and then we'll see what we're going to do. How much longer we're going to be here. I don't want to stifle debate from anybody. So why don't we do that? Why don't we put this bill in play? So I'll ask the clerk to read item number 4. Excuse me, not item number 4. It's an IC. So I'm going to go to Chairman Hull.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen. Senate Bill 697 comes to us by Representative Algiers. It's an exact duplicate that we passed on Tuesday, March 16th by Representative Kennedy, an act authorizing the town of Westerly to issue not to exceed $11 million in general obligation bonds. It's time sensitive, and it's been approved by the majority and minority leader. I move passage.
Okay. Chairman Hull moves. You have consent of both the majority and minority leader?
That is correct.
Okay. Are there any debate on the bill? The clerk will please unlock the machine. All those in affirmative on the IC, please vote green. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. My mistake. It's been a long day. Is there a second for that bill? There's seconds. Seconded by Representative Bia, Representative Phillips, Leader Filippi, Chairman Azanaro, Chairman Corvesi, Chairman McEntee for seconds. Any of the seconds? Hit the Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy. The bill has been seconded. All those in favor, please vote green. Any in the negative, vote red. Leader Blazajewski, any proxy votes on this? I don't think there is, because it's an IC. Am I correct? Yeah, same thing. Leader Filippi, there are no proxy votes. Clerk will please lock the machine. All those in favor, 65. 0 in the negative. The act shall prevail. Thank you. Without objection, please, we're going to transmit this to His Excellency the Governor or the Senate forthwith. Thank you. We'll be at ease for 1 minute, please. On the last item? For which one, Representative Tanzi? Certainly, so ordered. Thank you. So I want to give everybody a preview. We're going to marshal forward. The rest of the calendar items 4 through 7 will be continued through Thursday. We will continue with the bill before us. I have been told that if you shut the screen off only to vote, we can extend the life of the iPad. And the staff has assured me that if the iPads die for anybody, we can move to paper ballots. So you can still put all the amendments will be brought in. No, they're going to have a hard copy for everybody. We'll pass them out and we'll do a voice vote if we have to. So we're going to continue. So we're back on the bill. Representative Toban, on the bill, please.
Speaker, I don't get up a whole lot, but just taking some notes, and this pandemic has not been easy. Clearly, we weren't here all of last year, pretty much. And for the last 3 hours, just like some of the other committees have had their long sessions in the last couple of weeks, Finance has countless parents and children waiting for us to get there so they can discuss another sensitive topic. Our minds could continue to wander as to all the different things and how this will be, if passed, how it would be applied. It puzzles me to think that...
Excuse me. Please continue, Representative.
How is it that we've seen this done in the past when our colleagues from the other side aren't in agreement with something, they have countless amendments. It should have been expected. And yet we continue to do this. No, Blake.
What?
I'm not. I am not.
Excuse me. A point of order was made. The chair has to make a ruling. Representative Tabone, please stay on the bill.
I'm going right back to it.
Please.
Long story short is that this is something that could have been solved several hours ago. And when J.P. Morgan could not get a consensus on something, he'd put his people on a boat, he'd go up and down the Hudson until he got they came to an agreement. This is something that our leadership should have done last week or when this passed. That's what I was getting to.
So
you got ahead of me. So this is something that we could have expected, and this is something that should have been taken care of last week or over the weekend, so we could have debated this for a lot less time and gotten back to the business of what we're here to do. Now, this is extremely important, and climate change we all agree on. This is not about climate change. This is about passing power to one group or not. And so while I'm going to support this bill because I believe it's the right thing to do in its entirety, I believe that no bill is perfect. Bills are full of holes and flaws that we come back to and we try to make, we learn, and because hindsight's 20/20, we can go back and make some fixing. So I believe that we can do this the rest of the night, or we can get to this vote and maybe leadership sit down, and if we need to make some changes in the near future, we do it. But let's move forward. We have countless people waiting for us. The people of Rhode Island are waiting for us. Let's take this vote. Let's get this done. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Knight, and then Representative Chippendale.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the bill. I want to talk a little bit about the process very briefly. The Environment Committee met on this bill and discussed it at length with testimony that went hours. Tons of pieces, tons of letters in favor and against, lots of really thoughtful conversation, questions, homework to be done. That was this year. And you know what? We debated nearly the identical bill in the Environment Committee last year before we broke for the pandemic. where we again had hours of testimony, lots of conversation, letters both for and against, and conversations amongst ourselves and with the advocates. I personally have had several offline, out of the office conversations trying to figure out what this bill was trying to do over the last couple of years. This bill comes to you fully baked. This bill comes to you in the form that the committee wanted to be in. Trust the committee. Environment issues are not simple. They really aren't. This is a time to trust the committee. This doesn't come half-baked, and I urge you all to vote for the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Chippendale.
Thank you, Speaker. Respectfully, I'd like to ask the room to come to order if you could. I can't hear myself
Please.
think.
Thank you. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. We have had a spirited dialogue. We have had debate, and there have been amendments. And those amendments, 7 of which more, I hold in my hand at this moment, which will undoubtedly be ruled ungermane because this bill is so vague that we have the ability to rule the democratic process of debating ideas as non-germane. So, okay, I get it. But these 7 amendments are a response to things that my constituents, those who elected me to come here and make policy, unlike the ECC whatever, they asked me to deal with these issues. And it would be reckless of me as their representative not to do that. So when I hear silly things like our creative amendments, these are creative amendments. These are amendments in response to our constituents. And in fact, we are obligated to consider those things that may happen, as crazy as people may think they are, because this very body outlawed chickens that lay eggs in the state of Rhode Island. So we do some crazy crap in this room. So nothing we think of in an amendment should be dismissed in such an elitist, snobbish way as being some form of a trick. We're representing the people who elected us and sent us here. We also heard about tried and true methods and how wonderful it's going to be. Those tried and true methods have been in place since 1990, 31 years ago. We've achieved 10%. Yeah, they're tried and true, all right. Woo! Can't wait to see what the next round looks like. And the unelected body that we've spoken about ad nauseum today. Ad nauseum, the unelected, we are abrogating our authority to this unelected body. Need I remind everyone in this room that just this year we did something that's not that easy to do, change our rules. We changed our rules to allow us to bring administration officials, the same people we're being told to trust, into our committees under oath for the first time in the history of the House. We now have that power because we explicitly stated, and it's on the record, go back and watch the videos if you have a faulty memory. We stated that we do not trust them. We don't trust them. But today we do, because it works for us. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And there's a whole lot of cake having and cake eating going on today. I'm not going to put the 7 amendments in, but those amendments represented people who build houses for a living, who manufacture things for a living, and don't want to be dictated how and what materials they have to use, about farms, about people who raise their own food on their own property for their own personal consumption. All of these things are important to the people I represent. They're not props. They're not tricks, they're not ploys or tactics. I resent the characterization as such. If we're afraid of engaging in debate and discussing ideas in this body, if any one person has that fear, you need to check whether or not you belong here or you think you should be here. Because that's what we do. We debate ideas. And this bill...
Excuse me, there's a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, point of order, please. I'm confused. Are we talking about amendment or the bill, or are we just sitting here being admonished? I'm confused.
It's a good point. We are debating the bill. Representative Chippendale has 30 seconds left. If you could speak about the bill and not the characterization, I appreciate it. 30 seconds.
Certainly, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely. We will be dealing with this bill for years to come, obviously, the good and the bad. I just wish that the idealism that drove the particular language and elements of this bill was a little bit more pragmatic, because it does not reflect the reality that is our state. Just again, pointing to, we've only achieved 10% of those goals in the past 31 years, but we're going to do the next 90 between now and 2050 in under 30 years. It's insanity. We should have checks and balances on this, and we don't. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Leader Blazajewski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Rule 35, I move the question.
Thank you. Seconded by Floor Manager Edwards and Representative Knight. And seconded by Representative O'Brien, Chairwoman Fogarty, Representative Cortravan, Representative Carson, Representative Potter, Whip Kazarian, Representative Speakman, Representative Donovan, Chairman McNamara. The question has been called pursuant to Rule 35. There's no debate. Clerk will please unlock the machine. Shall we move the question? It's non-debatable. Vote green if you want to move the question. Vote red if you don't. All those please vote. Everyone voted. Clerk, please lock the machine. 58 in the affirmative, 9 in the negative. The question has been called. That means we have 10 minutes of debate left on the bill. There is no more than 3 minutes per person. Representative Carson, first light.
Thank you, Speaker, very much. I heard a lot tonight about how this bill does so much harm, and I wanted to say that I'm really optimistic, because I think that there is a new economy coming, and I think there'll be new jobs and new businesses, and I think that this bill really begins to position Rhode Island to be at the front of that kind of an economy. And I don't think we can afford not to do something on climate change. I wanted to say that I don't think they're going to tell us not to buy cars, because there aren't going to be any more gas cars. GM and Ford have already announced that they're not making gas cars after 2035, so we're not even going to be able to buy them. I want to comment that other states have already done this. Massachusetts did this about 13 years ago. They have a plan, they're meeting goals, they have a mandate, they have a roadblock. This is not some crazy idea that was made up around a kitchen table. This is something we're actually copying from other states that we actually admire, as a matter of fact. Because how many times do we hear that Massachusetts is ahead of us on so many things? Well, they're ahead of us on this, and I think that we should follow their lead. I wanted to say that I was in a meeting with Senator Whitehouse about 2 months ago, and I asked him what Rhode Island could do to position itself to be ready for the federal support that would be coming for resiliency and sustainability What could we do in Rhode Island to be ready to really get those federal dollars into Rhode Island? And he answered me with a couple of words. He said, Rhode Island needs a plan. He said the states that have plans will be the states that will be able to take advantage of federal programs and federal money. There are resources coming to assist us to meet these goals. I'm trying to make sure that we're ready. I want to close. I have many other things to say, but the hour is late. I want to close by saying that there was a survey done in October, and it was conducted by the Kennedy School, Harvard, Northeastern, Northwestern, and Rutgers University. And they polled 20,000 people across the country. Across the country, every state, COVID was the #1 issue. There were 2 states that identified climate change as the #2 issue, Alaska and Rhode Island. Our constituents want this. They're afraid.
30 seconds, please.
They're afraid of the costs. The industry is changing. We're going to create incentives for them. We're going to make this work. Our constituents want this. 83% of the people that responded to that poll nationwide from Rhode Island said climate change was their #2 priority. So I think we are acting in the best interest of our constituents, and I really encourage everyone to support this bill.
Thank you. Representative McLaughlin and then Leader Filippi.
Mr. Speaker and members of this body, I'll make it short and brief. Basically what I've got to say, I've already said, and I'm not going to be repetitious. I will not be voting for this bill. My constituents, the constituents that called me, I represent them. Jefferson once said, tyranny will prevail when men of a good conscience remain silent. Okay, and basically what I have to say is, brings back another scenario. I saw a lot of amendments tonight shot down, and I will say this, okay, when government interferes and mandates, okay, to the people, I remember why we fought a revolution, okay? I remember when the British taxed sunlight, okay, in the colonies. This is how far governments can go. The people have a right to choose their energy, to choose what they want to do, okay, what they want to drive. As far as General Motors is concerned, I'm a little bit bummed. I was always a Chevy person, you know, and they better rethink their positions, you know. With that said, I'll close. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader Filippi, and then Representative Morgan, and Deputy Speaker Lima will be the last recognition. Leader Filippi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the body. I think it's unfortunate we're cutting off debate. We've been cutting off debate all night, refusing ideas to be fully vetted. And I just have to say, what's the rush? And I think the rush is that the people are finally seeing what this thing is and talking about it, and word is spreading, and our constituents are upset, and we've got to ram this thing through. And that shouldn't give the people much faith in all the comments tonight saying just trust the process, because the process we're using tonight is untrustworthy. So I think what we're doing with this bill is emblematic. The process we use tonight is emblematic of the problems with this bill. It's a massive amount of authority given to unelected bureaucrats who have no ability to stop the wheels once they start turning. They don't have discretion. They have to adopt the plan no matter how costly. And they have to impose it on Rhode Islanders no matter how costly. And the only exit ramp is this body coming in and repealing or changing the law, and that's sustaining a gubernatorial veto. That should not give anybody comfort. The debate here tonight has not been about the climate change. It hasn't been about the polls saying that people want it. We know they want it. The debate here tonight is about whose responsibility it is. The responsibility is ours. We're punting. It's a cop-out. Because I think people in this body are afraid. They're afraid because they know that the plan that's going to be presented by the ECCCC is going to be so expensive and it's going to be so draconian that they know this body would never vote for it. And they can just say, it wasn't us, it was the governor. So that's not a profile in courage or leadership, and I'm embarrassed. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Speaker. I've heard people say we have to do something. We have to do something in Rhode Island. Well, we already have, and we should be proud of it. We have the second lowest carbon footprint in the country. So we have been doing something about it. Second lowest in the country. You know who doesn't have the second lowest anything? China, India, Africa. They are adding coal-fired power plants every week. If they don't do something, everything we do here in Rhode Island to crush our economy and our constituents won't make a difference. We have the second lowest carbon footprint in the United States. We also have the third highest electric rates in the country. We also have the sixth highest cost of living, which is making it very hard on our constituents who struggle to pay the bills every month. Have we done something? We have. Do we have to rush this through before we have all the data? We don't. We don't have the ISO report. We don't have a clear idea about whether these goals are even achievable for a state that already has the second lowest carbon footprint in the United States. We can pause. We can wait. We have done the work already. And we do not need to crush the little guys in Rhode Island. What we are doing with this will fall on the working poor hardest of all. The ones who pay the rents, the ones who pay the electric bill, the ones who will have to change their furnaces and their cars, the ones we keep talking about we're going to build more affordable housing for. We have done something as a state, something we should be proud of.
30 seconds.
We have the second lowest carbon footprint already.
Thank you. Last light, please. Deputy Speaker Lima.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I started off talking that I was concerned about climate change, and I think that something should be done. I'm getting hate tweets that I don't believe in climate change. I'm against doing something on climate change. If they listened better, they would have realized what I said. I'm against the process. I'm against what all my constituents call me saying, why are you giving this to a bunch of bureaucrats? Why did we elect you? I believe the decision-making process belongs with us. We represent the people. We should be doing it. The people deserve to have representatives that are held accountable. And Stash, I agree with you. Totally agree with you. If you're going to be part of leadership, you got to be part and included in the decision-making process. If you don't know what's going on, you can't use the leadership con. It's that simple. If you're not, you're either part of it or you're not. You should be informed. You should have input. They say the leaders did this, the General Assembly did this, but didn't know what was going on, and that's not right. And we should be making the hard decisions for the people. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Morales, I know you have your light lit, but we're out of time pursuant to the rules. At this time, pursuant to the rule, I will offer the sponsor, Representative Carson, 10 more minutes if she'd like, and she waives it, and I say thank you. At this time, the clerk will unlock the machine. On the bill as a whole, all those in favor, please vote green. Any against, please vote red. Leader Blazajewski, do you have any proxies, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have proxy votes in favor of item number 3 from Rep. Kassar and Rep. Lombardi. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader Filippi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Rule 47, I believe, negative proxy votes from Representatives Quattrocchi and Roberts, please.
Thank you. Representative Shawcross Smith, I'm seeing a little bit of difficulty. There you go. Thank you. Every representative in the chamber, please vote. The clerk will unlock the machine. Lock the machine. 53 in the affirmative, 22 in the negative. The act shall prevail. Thank you.